Chapter 1265. As they would still have to take the sleigh on the return journey, the children did not feel very sad when they said goodbye. Shishi held her brother's hand and happily said goodbye to the dogs. Then, everyone took the icebreaker together and arrived at the floating spot on the ice lake. But there, they encountered a big problem that David had forgotten about. Only people who are 1.45 meters tall can float on the ice lake? Yang Yi looked at David, a little surprised. When he heard the captain's words, Yang Yi could not help but frown. He looked back at the children. Tong Tong, as a dwarf, he definitely could not reach 1.45 meters. And Shishi would probably be a little bit troublesome. Yang Yi measured Shishi's height every month at home. Even before they came to Sweden, he measured Shishi. In other words, Shishi was 1.39 meters tall a few days ago. This height was already very outstanding. She was only 7 years old. Among the children of the same age in China, there was a clear gap. This was also why every parent-teacher conference, parents would sigh and wonder why Shishi was so tall when they were all Chinese and grew up eating grains. But overseas, Shishi's height could only be considered above average. Lu Weisha was 1 year older than Shishi. Compared to Shishi, she was slightly taller, but not by much, just 2 or 3 fingers width. In any case, Shishi was 1.39 meters tall. In just a few days, it was impossible for her to grow 6 centimeters tall. After listening to Yang Yi's question, David was stunned for a moment. He then patted his head and apologized with a face full of regret. He had not participated in this project for a long time. This history could be traced back to before he and Maria were married and had children. Naturally, he had forgotten about such a requirement. With apprehension, the children stood below the 1.45 meter height line to be measured. Sure enough, as expected, Shishi did not pass. Not only Shishi, but Lu Weisha also fell short. She was about 1.42 meters tall. What should I do? Shishi looked at her father eagerly. Her 2 little hands were so confused that she did not know where to place them. Only Tong Tong was still foolishly happy. He did not know that he could not float in the lake. He even curiously moved his short little legs and walked around the boat, looking at so many new things. Yang Yi gritted his teeth and pulled a long face. He asked the captain if he could make an exception. Tong Tong, Shishi and Lu Weisha were about the same height. Could he turn a blind eye and let them go down to play? In the past, Yang Yi did not like this practice. He felt that taking the back door was a sign of weakness. But now for the children, Yang Yi opened his mouth. However, the strict Nordic people did not give Yang Yi a chance to make an exception. They even explained in detail why they did not allow children below 1.45 meters to go down the lake. On one hand, it was because it was not safe. They were worried that the children's body coordination was not good enough. On the other hand, it was because they had specially made rubber suits that could float people. They needed to be at least 1.45 meters tall to be able to support them. Thus, there was no other way. Yang Yi turned around regretfully. He held Shishi's little hand and patiently explained, "I can't play anymore." Shishi looked at the group of tourists who had already gone down the lake reluctantly. Her envious eyes made one's heart ache. However, at this time, Lu Weisha ran over and comforted Shishi. "Shishi, it's okay. I can't go down to play either. When you come to my house to play in the future, we can play this together." Shishi quickly regained her vitality under the persuasion of her friends. She happily held Lu Weisha's hand and jumped up and down. "Okay, but I want to wait until my brother is as tall as you. Then we can play together." Okay. Lu Weisha jumped up and down with Shishi without hesitation and giggled. Yang Yi could not help but smile at the side. "You're really an innocent child. You've never thought about how long you'll have to wait for a 2-year-old Momo to grow up to 1.45 meters tall." Although Yang Yi and the others came out to play very early, it was not long before they had to embark on their return journey. After all, the sunshine was very short. If they did not go back early, it would be dark on the way back. When they took the sleigh back to the town where they parked, the sky was obviously dark. Although there was still a bright sunset on the horizon, burning the sky like a raging fire, the sun had already set. "Shishi, let's go. We have to go back to the hotel," Yang Yi said. But I haven't said goodbye to the dogs yet." Shishi reluctantly looked at the huskies who had followed the lead dog back to the doghouse after they got off the sleigh. Then Daddy will carry you. You can say goodbye to the dogs by the window. Yang had no choice but to gesture to the front. He bent down and lifted Shishi up high. This way, the little girl could see the dogs through the window. Oh, so smelly. Shishi had just got close to the window and could not help but frown. Right? Daddy told you this morning that they look very cute, but they hardly take a bath. They just rub themselves in the snow, so they're very dirty and smelly. Yang laughed. Don't touch the window. You'll get dirty if you rub your clothes against the window. But why don't the dogs take a bath? Shishi asked, feeling conflicted. Because it is very cold here. After the dogs take a bath, the water in their hair does not dry easily. It is very easy for them to get sick from the cold. Also normally, they do not need to take a bath, Yang explained patiently. Although she was conflicted, Shishi saw that when she got close to the window, the dogs in the doghouse all looked up at her and jumped around excitedly. This made the little girl happy again. Dogs goodbye. Shishi waved at them reluctantly and said softly. When Yang carried Shishi and walked in the direction of the minivan, the little girl still hugged her father's neck and said, Daddy, I think these dogs are very cute. They are like steamed bun. They are very obedient. I want to bring them home. This way, steamed bun can play with them. At this moment in Jiangcheng, steamed bun, who was obediently staying in Lan Xian's house, suddenly sneezed. He raised his head and looked around. In the end, he only saw 3 pairs of green eyes that he had woken up. Bring them home? Bring them back. Yang thought about having such a large group of demon kings living in his house, and felt a headache coming on. These huskies were very obedient, but when they were not at home, these guys could not resist their lively nature. They would start to bite the sofa, play with the toilet paper, and so on, and make a mess of the house. Ahem, Shishi, we already have steamed bun and little Guai at home. We don't need so many more dogs, right? Besides, it's so far away. We can't bring them back. Yang said with a smile. Shishi was quite sensible. She sighed regretfully, nestled in her father's arms and muttered, Yes, but I will miss them. Well, when we come to Sweden in the future, we will definitely come back to see them, okay? Yang said with a smile. When the time comes, we will buy a big bag of beef and bring it to them. They will be very happy. Yes, yes. At this time, Shishi's imagination seemed to be stimulated by her father. She regained her usual liveliness and happily gestured in her father's arms. Then I will also prepare gifts for them. I want to draw pictures for them. In the world of ice and snow, the little girl's little face was red from the cold. Her innocent smile was like a snow lotus blooming softly and quietly. She was so cute. Chapter 1266. The hotel was like an ice cave. Although it sounded romantic and seemed like a fantasy, they only knew how cold it was when they lived there. At night, after a simple dinner, everyone returned to their respective suites. In Yang Yi's suite, the waiters had already considerately laid out 2 more layers of animal skins and prepared several layers of thick blankets for them. Because the light reflected from the ice was very dim in the room, Shishi and Tong Tong were a little sleepy when they returned to the room, so they lazily leaned on their father. What should we do tonight? Murphy came back happily. Then, she looked around the room filled with ice and found that there was no place to sit down. She could only look at Yang Yi eagerly. Let's sleep early tonight. We'll take the bus back to David's house tomorrow morning. Yang Yi smiled and brushed away the snow on Shishi's shoulder. He said, It's Lu Weisha's house in Göteborg. Shishi was still a little reluctant to leave her father's leg. She blinked her eyes and asked, Papa, aren't we going skiing? The little girl was still thinking about yesterday's skiing. The little girl, who had just learned a little, wanted to continue learning. We can't do it this time because Uncle David has to go to work and Lu Weisha has to go back to school. Next time when we come to Sweden or go to the northern city to play, Papa will take you skiing. Yang Yi explained to Shishi apologetically. Okay then. Shishi pulled on the hem of her father's coat. Because the coat was too big, her little butt could not be seen. She only slightly twisted her body and pouted her little mouth as she said sullenly, I want to learn how to ski next time. Murphy was unwilling to be left out. Then, she returned to the topic at hand. How are we going to sleep tonight? I just realized that there is no place to change clothes or take a bath. Yang Yi laughed and pointed to the big bed. He said, forget about taking a bath. Let's go back to Göteborg first. Tonight, we'll sleep in our current clothes. Don't worry about anything else. Just go to bed and sleep. Wear my current clothes? Murphy looked at Yang Yi in shock. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. Of course, this disbelief was directed at Yang Yi. Her eyes seemed to be saying suspiciously, are you sure you want to sleep without showering or changing clothes? Would Yang Yi be able to tolerate being so sloppy? Not to mention Yang Yi, even Shi, who was listening at the side, was so anxious that she stood on tiptoe. She stretched out her right hand and let her father grab her right wrist. She asked awkwardly, Papa, but if I don't take a bath, will I become smelly? It's okay, just bear with it. One night will pass. We're here to experience this ice hotel. Yang Yi comforted her gently. When Dad was in the army, he was often covered in mud and hid in the rainforest. There was no place to shower or sleep, but he still managed to survive for half a month. Although she was still worried that she would become smelly, after her father helped her take off her thick snow boots and put on new socks, the little girl seemed to have forgotten her initial sleepiness and began to jump on the bed with Tong Tong again. Stepping on several layers of furry animal skin blankets, they could not feel the hardness and coldness of the ice bed below them. The children's curiosity naturally prevailed. He. At first, Shi and her brother did not speak. They just jumped around on the bed. After all, the large bed that could fit 5 or 6 people was enough for them to freely exercise their energy. Even when she stepped on the slippery animal fur and fell down, Shi rolled twice on the thick blanket, lying on all fours, and laughed with a slight gasp. When Tong Tong, the little fool, saw his sister fall down, he followed suit. He slowly turned around and rolled over, lying on all fours beside his sister. Then he turned his head and looked at his sister with a grin. Shi turned over and crawled over like a little pig. She arched her head on Tong Tong's stomach and shook her head, making Tong Tong hold his sister's head and laugh loudly. Ha 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 ha. The little fellow's laughter was very loud, and it echoed in the large room. You're smelly. Shi raised her head and said with a grunt. He. No, sister is smelly. The little fellow continued to laugh. However, because he was too fat, he could not straighten his body directly. Like a little turtle, he tried for a long time before he gave up and chose to lie down. He yelled with laughter. You didn't take a shower. Shi wanted to tease him, so she deliberately turned her head and shouted, I want to sleep with Papa tonight, not with you. Tong Tong heard this and became anxious. He turned over and tried to arch his little butt. As he climbed up, he struggled to groan. Oh no, I want sister to sleep with me. At this time, with the help of Yang Yi, Murphy took off her thick coat and changed into a clean-down jacket. Then she quickly climbed into bed and got under the blanket. However, the blanket was not warm at this time, and she was so cold that she cried out, Don't fight, Papa is mine. Mom also wants Papa to hug me to sleep tonight. At this time, the two little fellows laughed even more wantonly. Haha, I also want Papa to hug me. Little Tigress was still following her sister, jumping and barking. However, it was difficult to tell whether it was the sister who led the brother astray, or the brother who led the sister astray. After all, Shi rarely laughed so crazily. The little girl grew up and became more and more reserved. Today, Shi jumped on the bed and shouted as loudly as Tong Tong, which was really rare. It was as if the playful nature of children had returned. After a while, Yang Yi asked the two children, who did not feel cold, to get under the blanket. It's time to sleep. We have to get up tomorrow morning to catch the train. Shi reluctantly got under the blanket. Tong Tong had not played enough, but now he was his sister's little follower, and he would do whatever his sister did. Ah! Murphy shouted. It's so cold. Mom tried so hard to warm the blanket, but you brought in the cold air. Ha 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 ha. The two little fellows laughed triumphantly as if they had done a prank. After playing to their heart's content and shouting until they were exhausted, Shi and Tong Tong fell asleep under the warm blanket. After they fell asleep, Yang Yi quietly got up and put on cotton hats that could cover their ears. After all, The temperature in the room was still a few degrees below zero. It was warmer because it was isolated from the outside. So a knitted nightcap was not enough. However, after doing all this, Yang Yi looked up and saw Murphy's sparkling eyes. "Why don't you sleep?" Yang Yi asked softly. "I'm cold." Mo Fei looked at Yang Yi pitifully. Her hands were still under the quilt. She arched a little, gestured a little, pointed at the space under the little guys and said, "It's cold here." Yang Yi understood what she meant. He smiled gently and said, "Then come over and sleep on my right side." Murphy was immediately overjoyed. She did not dare to get out of the blanket, so she directly buried her head under the blanket. Like a groundhog, she arched a big lump and crawled over under the little fellow's feet. Fortunately, the blanket and bed were very big. After crawling over, Murphy trembled and hugged Yang Yi's arm. She buried her head under the blanket and said in a muffled voice, "It's cold here too." "It's okay. It'll be warm soon." Yang Yi pulled his right arm out of Murphy's hand, then wrapped it around her head and hugged her in his arms. He first kissed her cold face and smiled gently. Murphy was hugged by Yang Yi and finally felt relieved. She twisted her body and used the pillow to find a position where Yang Yi's arm would not be pressed down by her. Then she could comfortably snuggle in Yang Yi's arms. She smiled at Yang Yi with satisfaction, closed her eyes, and began to sleep with a sweet smile. Yang Yi's other hand also hugged the two little fellows. His body was at full power, like a heater, continuously providing them with heat. It was a little tiring, but just treat it as practicing martial arts. The most important thing was that his family could sleep comfortably and peacefully. Chapter 1267. With Yang Yi's protection, Murphy and the two little rascals had a good night's sleep. When they woke up the next day, Tong Tong was sleeping in his father's arms. Shi, on the other hand, was sleeping slanted over. She was practically lying in her father's arms. Her two arms were hugging her father's neck, and her head was nestled against her father's face. Even though her father's beard was a little prickly, she was still sleeping soundly. Shi's sleeping posture was very strange. Her right leg was hanging from her father's arm on the bed. Her socked foot was raised up, and it was right between her brother and her father. Tong Tong was miserably hugged by his father, and he even unknowingly buried his head in his sister's calf. His nose was very close to his sister's foot. The little rascal was sleeping very soundly. He was probably immersed in a delicious dream. After sitting on the train for a few hours, they returned to Göteborg. At Lu Weisha's house, Yang Yi, Murphy, and the children could finally enjoy the heat and hot water. First, they took a comfortable bath. Then Maria went to the supermarket to buy ingredients. Yang Yi cooked for everyone. For Yang Yi, it was considered a simple Chinese meal. Firstly, they wanted to show off Yang Yi's cooking skills. Secondly, everyone was tired from the long journey. They wanted to take a break and eat a warm Chinese meal to comfort their tired stomachs. At night, they could go out and enjoy the night view of Göteborg. During dinner, Shi did not forget to pick up her camera. She wanted to take pictures of the dishes and bring them back to Lon Xian. Yang Yi did not know whether to laugh or cry. He stopped the little girl who was still in a daze. "Why are you taking pictures of this? These are all things that Xian Air has eaten before. You have to take pictures of some special dishes, and then take pictures of some beautiful scenery. Only then can you share them with Xian Air." The time spent playing with friends was always short. The next day, Lu Weisha could still spend half a day in Göteborg with Shi in the morning, but in the afternoon, she had to go to school to register. Her short winter break was over and the new semester would begin. As for Shi and her family, after sending Lu Weisha to school in the afternoon, they would also take the train to Stockholm. There, after a simple day of sightseeing, they had to leave Sweden and travel across half of Europe by train. They came to the romantic capital of France for shopping. Their European trip could be said to be coming to an end. However, for Lu Weisha and Shi, this afternoon's farewell at the school gate was already the end of their reunion. They didn't know when they would meet again, so the two girls couldn't bear to part with each other. They held each other's hands tightly at the school gate and felt sad. Before Shi could cry, the sentimental Lu Weisha was already wiping her tears at the school gate with her backpack on her back. Lu Weisha, I also want to play with you. She looked at her friend's tears and finally couldn't help crying. Her eyes were as red as her face, which was red from the cold. She asked tearfully, Papa, can I play with Lu Weisha for a few more days? Yang Yi knew this would happen. He walked up to the two girls and gently hugged them in his arms. He comforted them softly. Although we can stay for a few more days, Lu Weisha still has to go to school. She can't play with us. If we stay, we will disturb Lu Weisha's studies. Lu Weisha shook her head hard and said with a choked voice, I don't want to go to school. I want to play with Shishi. Ooh, Lu Weisha, you are so kind. Shishi was stupidly moved when she heard this and cried even more. Don't cry. If you cry again, your beautiful faces will be frozen. Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he coaxed them. He knew that at this time, there was no way to reason with the two girls. However, Yang Yi still didn't expect Shishi to be so imaginative. She cried and pleaded, I can also go to school with Lu Weisha. I don't want to go on a trip, okay? Papa, we don't want to go shopping. I want to go to school with Lu Weisha. Yang Yi asked helplessly. That won't do. Let's not talk about whether Lu Weisha's teacher and principal will let you come to school or not. If you want to stay in Sweden to study, what will happen to your family? Xian Air, little Yuer, Shiryun, Chi sister Xiaowei, won't they miss you more? Shishi looked at her father helplessly with misty eyes. But Lu Weisha can come to our house to play for a long time. Lu Weisha, a little girl who was older than Shishi, couldn't bear it. She buried her head in Shishi's shoulder and sobbed. Yang Yi paused and said softly, Actually, it doesn't matter. Although we didn't spend much time in Sweden, we still had a lot of fun. You and Lu Weisha were very happy, right? Then when we went back, it was almost summer again. When the summer vacation comes, we can invite Lu Weisha to come to China. Think about it, our amusement park will open then. When Lu Weisha comes, we can go to the amusement park together and see if the ice palace we built is more fun than the ice hotel we stayed in. Also, let me tell you, there are many fun things in the amusement park. Yang Yi's vivid description made the two girls forget to cry for a while. They stared at him blankly and listened attentively. So let's think about it. The next time we see Lu Weisha, we won't have much time to play together, right? Yang Yi said with a smile. Then why are we in a hurry to play these few days? It will also affect Lu Weisha's studies. Why don't you both go back to your own schools, study hard, and learn more knowledge? When the summer vacation comes, we can play together, okay? Finally, under Yang Yi's persuasion, the two girls finally said goodbye to each other reluctantly. They took a photo of a weeping beauty as a souvenir. Shishi waved and watched Lu Weisha walk into school. She was going to embark on a new journey with her father. After returning to Stockholm, Yang Yi was surprised to find that the security of the entire city had been raised by a level. Even the familiar train station when they left the station was assigned a very strict security force. Yang Yi and his team were also under strict scrutiny. It was worth mentioning that when Murphy and Maria were shopping in Göteborg last night, they bought a pair of crystal high heels that could only be put on display and not worn. It was not because it was expensive, but because it was fragile. Don't ask why she still bought it. The power of beauty can make a woman blind. This pair of high heels was also asked by the security personnel to take out for a check. After confirming that there was no problem, they were allowed to pass. Maria, who came to be their tour guide, accompanied them and helped to explain the whole process. After that, Maria explained to Yang Yi and the rest apologetically, "This is not targeted at Asians. Everyone will go through such strict scrutiny." She was apologizing to Yang Yi on behalf of her motherland. After all, such strict scrutiny and the tense faces of the policemen still scared the children. She held her father's hand nervously, not daring to leave his side. Did something serious happen? Why are there so many policemen? Murphy, who did not pay much attention to the news, asked curiously. Yes, because next week, there will be a global climate conference in Stockholm. Many countries' leaders or politicians will come here, so the level of security has been raised to the highest level, Maria said. Isn't that dangerous? Murphy asked Maria worriedly. Don't worry, Stockholm is the safest at this time. Maria laughed and said, As long as we stay away from the demonstration team, we can enjoy the protection of the president while traveling in Stockholm. Yang Yi was also very calm. He smiled and observed the surroundings. He knew that although Maria's words were a bit of a joke, what she said was not wrong. Chapter 1268. Do not underestimate the power of one country, and even more so, do not underestimate the combined power of many countries. Even the organization that Yang Yi had worked for in his previous life would not have dared to take on such a mission during a meeting where the presidents of many countries were gathered. At least, Yang Yi had not done such a thing in his previous life. In his previous life, when he was dealing with a politician from a small country in the Middle East, he had to plan carefully for a long time before taking action when the other party let down his guard. Only a fool who did not care about his own life would dare to break into someone else's impenetrable defense when the other party was heavily guarded. Even if there were such men of sacrifice, when faced with such a high level of security, the success rate of a terrorist attack would be very low, not to mention not daring to take action. At such a time, Yang Yi had to hide as far away as possible. After all, he had a criminal record, and he could not afford to be investigated by others. After all, those scenes in the movies where people bravely charged into dangerous places were all fictional. Of course, in this world, Yang Yi's identity was just an ordinary person. He could calmly walk on the streets with his wife and children, and leisurely enjoy the scenic spots of Stockholm. Yang Yi and his family did not encounter any unnecessary obstacles in their last days in Sweden. The next afternoon, Maria sent them on a train that was unique to this world, which went directly to the European continent. The speed of the train was not fast, which was just right for them to travel all the way south and travel through half of Europe. During the one-day and one-night journey, the interesting things were not only the scenery outside the train, but also the constantly rising temperature and the two children playing in the train. When they were in Sweden, Murphy was so cold that she could not have fun. But as the train traveled south, gradually the temperature rose, and the weather became warmer. The temperature rose from -10 degrees to above zero. Especially when they were passing through Germany, the weather there was completely comfortable. It was similar to the winter in Jiang City. Murphy could get rid of the thick cotton coat and change into her favorite pair of flannel leggings and jeans. If they encountered a bus stop that was longer and she could get off the bus for a walk, she only needed to put on a long windbreaker and didn't have to worry about the cold. Finally, Murphy, who had worn too much and looked a little bloated, returned to her fashionable and lively appearance. She was so happy that she couldn't wait to ask Yang Yi to take a few more photos of her at the small scenic spots next to the station. After all, when she was in Sweden, Murphy didn't want her bloated image to appear on camera. For Shi and Tong Tong, who did not know the cold and warmth of the weather, they did not care whether they were wearing a lot of clothes or not. In the relatively spacious four-bed sleeping compartment that their father had booked, the two children played non-stop except for sleeping. Although they were playing a special game, some simple actions were enough to make them laugh for a long time. For example, Shishi took advantage of her long legs and climbed onto the upper bunk. Last night, when they went to bed, Yang Yi and Murphy each took one child to sleep on the lower bunk. Therefore, the upper bunk was a new experience for the children. After seeing his sister climb onto the upper bunk, Tong Tong also grabbed the small ladder and stood on the lower bunk bed, trying to climb up. "Don't climb up, it's dangerous." Murphy pulled the ambitious little boy back. In the end, Shishi stuck her head down from the upper bunk bed and made a face at Tong Tong. This made Tong Tong very anxious. He whined and ran around in circles, trying to find a way to get up. "Little brother." Shishi giggled, stretched out her small arm, and shook it at Tong Tong. Although they were on a European train, the height difference between the upper and lower bunk beds was not very big. Tong Tong was standing on the lower bunk, so he could reach the upper bunk if he raised his hand. When he saw his sister reaching down, he quickly stretched out his hand as if he wanted to grab onto this life-saving straw. However, Shishi reacted quickly. She immediately withdrew her hand and dodged. Hee. The little girl winked at her brother proudly. Tong Tong pouted, but he was not discouraged. He still held onto the small ladder and looked up eagerly. Since he did not climb up, Murphy did not stop him. She and Yang-yi watched the siblings with interest. After a while, she stuck her head out again and tried to reach out her small hand. Sure enough, Tong Tong acted as if he was being fished and hastily pulled her hand out. But this time he missed again. Cece's reaction was still very fast. She immediately withdrew her hand and then laughed happily. Tong Tong stamped his feet in dissatisfaction. An anxious expression was written all over the little guy's face. Little brother, do it again. She saw this and stretched out her hand again. This time, Shishi's reaction seemed to be slower. Tong Tong grabbed his sister's hand. He, I got it. The little fellow finally had a little sense of accomplishment. He beamed with joy and raised his head, grinning at his sister. Yang-yi watched from the side and could not help but raise his eyebrows. Could it be? Sure enough, Shishi was on top again. After she withdrew her hand, she stuck her head out and said, "Little brother, do it again. I won't let you catch me this time." "I'll catch you." Tong Tong puffed out his small chest and jumped up and down confidently. However, the speed at which Shishi attacked and retracted her hand was very fast. This time little Xiaowei returned empty-handed. "Do you want to continue?" Shishi stuck her head out again. Her slightly messy hair hung down, but it could not hide the little girl's happy smile. Yes, Tong Tong was completely immersed in this game. Although he often failed to catch his sister, occasionally he could catch her, which made him so happy that he somersaulted on the bottom bunk. Haha. The little guy and his sister's presumptuous laughter echoed in the box, and even attracted the attention of the train police. Later, they lowered their voices a little, but still had a good time. Why do I feel that Shishi deliberately let Momo catch her? Murphy could not help but ask Yang-yi. Yang-yi had been holding back his laughter for a long time. He stuck his head out and whispered in Murphy's ear. "It should be. Do you still remember table tennis? Shishi is very good at table tennis, but everyone is not willing to play with her, so I taught her to go easy on her friends. Now Shishi is the same. She probably wants Tong Tong to play with her, so she also goes easy on Tong Tong." But even so, Tong Tong was still very happy. These days he could not stop laughing. He was more cheerful and happy than before the trip. Perhaps this was also because his sister could play with him? When they were at home, his sister always had to go to school during the day and did not have much time to play with him. It was rare that he could play with his sister in this small room. How could Tong Tong care if his sister was teasing him? He was happy enough to play with his sister. Chapter 1269. During the journey, when they passed by Leipzig in Germany, Murphy suddenly thought of something. She asked Yang-yi to let them get off the train and stop at this ancient city that carried the history of music. Yang-yi knew that the city of Leipzig, in this world, for the vast majority of musicians, actually had a sacred meaning of pilgrimage. After all, there were many classical music masters from Europe who had come out of this city. Among them, there was no lack of great musicians like Beethoven in Yang-yi's previous life, who brought countless beautiful symphonies, operas, and other works to this world. Even now, Leipzig's Conservatory of Music cultivated many outstanding professionals every year, and its ancient concert hall, countless top music masters have performed here. After being renovated in the 1980s, it was like Vienna's Golden Hall, where every orchestra and every performance master rushed like a flock of ducks. Although Murphy was in the pop music industry, she grew up listening to classical music from Leipzig. After knowing that they were going to stop at Leipzig, Murphy couldn't help but want to go on a pilgrimage. However, this idea also meant that they wouldn't be able to catch the train that was only stopping for a short time. Then what should we do? Shishi looked at her father a little anxiously. "It doesn't matter." Yang-yi smiled, waved his fist, and said to boost their morale, "It doesn't matter if we can't catch this trip, we can sit down and buy new tickets. Since we're out to play, we should have fun." "Oh yeah. Long live Papa." Murphy was overjoyed. She raised her arms and cheered. Not only that, Murphy also reached out her hand, wanting to high-five Shishi and Tong Tong. Shishi giggled, deliberately turned her body, and ran away. Fortunately, Murphy still had Tong Tong. Influenced by his mother's positive mood, the little boy also jumped and laughed. He tried to raise his little hand, and in the midst of his giggling, he clapped with his mother. However, the little boy's clap was not very accurate, and his little palm only brushed his mother's hand. Murphy was not satisfied. She shouted at Tong Tong, who was running happily to his sister. "Hey, you haven't clapped yet." Unfortunately, there was no orchestra performing in Leipzig's concert hall today, so Yang Yi and Murphy could only stroll around and enjoy the scenery of this music-holy land. However, in the open square outside, Yang Yi and Murphy enjoyed a unique performance. A street artist with a beard and tattered clothes carefully held his violin and played a beautiful melody. His skills were really not bad. Even though the difference between him and Yang Yi could not be seen, Murphy was still far from his level. Yang Yi even felt that the artist's skills were enough to perform in some of the country's provincial concerts. But why would an artist like this choose to wander the streets of Leipzig instead of using his skills to find a decent job to support his family? Murphy asked Yang Yi such a question. Yang Yi thought for a long time, then smiled bitterly. Who knows? Maybe he's another Entrekland. Who's Entrekland? Asked Murphy, confused. Yang Yi snapped out of his thoughts, smiled, and said, He's a character in a story I'm going to write, but he abandoned his wife and children for the sake of art. The story is a little depressing, so let's not learn from him. When Murphy heard that, she immediately shook her head and said in surprise, I don't like people like that, you can't learn from them. Yang Yi smiled, rubbed Murphy's head and said, Do you think I'm that kind of person? The two kids did not pay attention to their parents' conversation. They were completely focused on the street artist's performance. Perhaps Shi and Tong Tong did not understand and did not know how to appreciate it, but their feelings of beauty were the same. Listening to the beautiful melody and watching the man's intoxicated performance, Shishi's expression was a little serious, as if she did not dare to disturb others. Tong Tong was also very fascinated, holding his sister's hand with one hand and his mother with the other, not moving an inch. In Leipzig, Yang Yi and Mo Fei also visited some quaint musical instrument halls. The most valuable thing to buy here was the violin. On the one hand, the workmanship was very good, and the German craftsmanship was admirable. On the other hand, it was light and easy to carry. After all, it was impossible for Yang Yi to buy a piano and carry it home when he was traveling. However, even after Yang Yi took Murphy and the children around, he still did not plan to buy one. Why not? Asked Murphy, surprised. Yang Yi smiled and said, The violin you gave me is enough. Why would I buy another one? Murphy was stunned for a moment. She felt sweet inside, but she was a little stubborn, so she pretended not to care and said, But this one is even better. Look at the materials used. It's not unreasonable that it's expensive. It's a grade higher than mine. Although she said that, Murphy still blinked nervously. She looked at Yang Yi with eyes full of worry. Yang Yi laughed and said, Then I don't want it. I think that the violin you gave me as a birthday present can play the most beautiful music in the world. Murphy was satisfied. She shook her head proudly and snorted sweetly. Do as you wish. They returned to the train station. Although the sunshine in Germany was much longer than in Sweden, it was already night when they returned after dinner. Yang Yi bought a train ticket to Paris. However, their train was a little late, so they had to wait at the train station for 2 hours. So late. Murphy stretched lazily in the waiting hall, then put her arms on Yang Yi's shoulders and smiled. If I had known, we would have gone shopping at the restaurant before coming back. Although Murphy and Yang Yi were in an ordinary waiting hall, and there were people coming and going around, no one could recognize them. After all, Yang Yi and Murphy's fame had not spread to Germany yet. Moreover, in the eyes of Westerners, Asians looked similar. Even if they had heard some of Yang Yi's English songs, they would not be able to recognize them immediately. With a hurried glance, they would only think that they were ordinary Asian tourists. But this feeling was good. Mingling with ordinary people, they did not have to worry about being surrounded, and they did not have to wear big sunglasses, airtight masks, and hats. Yang Yi and Murphy liked this ordinary and free feeling very much. Shishi and Tong Tong could not sit still during the 2-hour waiting time. Shishi quickly jumped down from the bench with her brother, and ran around the bench that they were sitting on happily. Brother, come and chase me. Hee hee, you can't catch me. Shishi ran in front, and her bell-like laughter echoed in the train station. Little Swan and I was also giggling, but he was busy chasing after his sister, so his laughter was not obvious. He only shook his little butt and ran behind his sister. Even if he could not catch up, he was still very happy. But soon the two little guys were stopped by their father. Yang Yi still paid attention to the quality of children's education. He was worried that the two little guys would disturb the quiet and orderly atmosphere of the train station, so he quickly waved his hand and said, "Shishi, mommy, come here." They could not play, and they had to listen to their father's reasoning. Shishi and mommy were sandwiched in their father's arms and could not move. But at this time, the clear sound of a piano came from not far away, which attracted the attention of the two little guys who were a little impatient. Chapter 1270. Someone's playing the piano. Shishi had been learning piano from her parents for a semester. Although she wasn't very good at it, and was only at the beginner level in Yang Yi's eyes, she was very sensitive to the sound of the piano. She immediately poked her head out of her father's arms, and looked around with her big bright eyes. She quickly locked onto the direction. Piano. Tong Tong hadn't reacted yet. He was attracted by his sister's reaction, and looked forward in confusion. Seeing that the two little guys were so interested and that it was indeed boring to just sit there, Yang Yi let go of his arms and patted their little butts. He smiled and said, "Let's go and take a look." When Yang Yi bought the tickets, he had asked the railway staff to arrange for the large pieces of luggage to be loaded onto the luggage car. Therefore, Yang Yi and Murphy only had to carry a carry-on luggage bag and bring the children to the sound of the piano. It turned out that there was also a piano in the corner of the waiting hall of the train station in Leipzig. Why was it also? Because when he saw this piano, Yang Yi suddenly recalled that when his family was in America, there was also such a piano in Fort Worth's St. Lucas Square. However, that was a vertical piano, while the one in front of him was a grand piano. It was indeed a city of music. The city government wasn't stingy with their investment in music. Yang Yi and Murphy brought Shishi and Tong Tong to a nearby chair and sat down. Shishi might have felt that the angle of the piano was too small, so she simply stood up and pinched the hem of her shirt while focusing on the person playing the piano. The person playing the piano was a tall Caucasian youth. He was probably also a tourist in Leipzig because he was carrying a small backpack. Although he was only playing at an amateur level, to Yang Yi's picky ears, there were many mistakes in the sound and rhythm. However, he was playing very seriously. His expression was focused, and he was not disturbed by the surrounding passengers. Even his eyes were focused, giving people the feeling that he was not at the train station, but at the Leipzig concert hall. This kind of dedication really made people feel his love for music. Naturally, although he didn't play perfectly, there were still many tourists with kind smiles on their faces. They raised their phones or cameras to take pictures or videos of him. After the young man finished his performance, he thanked the audience amidst a round of applause and left quietly. The waiting hall of the train station returned to silence and order. However, Shishi was still by her father's side, looking in the direction of the piano from time to time. The little girl's expression was a little hesitant. On the other hand, Tong Tong was a little impatient. He struggled out of his father's arms and looked left and right. He was afraid that his father would scold him, so he deliberately walked to the other side. Then he turned around and walked back to his sister. Hee. Tong Tong had just lifted his evil little paws when he realized that his sister had suddenly turned her head. He was instantly embarrassed and could only smile awkwardly at his sister. Hee, sister, I caught you. Wow, this little guy wanted to play with his sister. But he didn't say so directly. He secretly wanted to play a prank on his sister, so that she would catch him. However, Shishi was a little absent-minded. She reached out her hand and shushed Tong Tong. She whispered, "Don't make noise. Be quiet." Tong Tong shrunk his head and followed his sister's example. He beamed with joy and shushed his sister. Yang Yi could tell that something was wrong. He stood up and gently placed his hand on the little girl's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Shishi, let's go and see what the piano looks like, okay?" He did not say it directly because he knew that Shishi would be a little shy. This suggestion was exactly what Shishi wanted. She happily lifted her little head and looked at her father. She did not say anything and just happily stuffed her little hand into her father's hand. Yang Yi pulled Shishi and brought her to the piano. The little girl curiously poked her little head out to look at this piano that belonged to someone else. The little girl, who had a good upbringing, was very sensible. She only dared to look but did not dare to touch it. She did not even dare to touch the piano stool. Do you want to try it? Yang Yi asked Shishi with a smile. Can I play it? The little girl looked at her father with some surprise and asked. Yes, it's placed here for tourists to play when they are waiting for the bus. We are tourists, so of course we can play it. Yang Yi smiled and pointed at the piano stool. He said, Come on, sit on it and try it. However, Shishi was still a little embarrassed. She giggled, hugged her father's hand and hid behind him. She shyly said, I don't want to. What are you afraid of? You have been learning the piano for half a year. You can play a few songs. Play your favorite song and let everyone hear it. Yang Yi said encouragingly, Learning music, you have to be bold to show it. Only then will there be more progress in the future. Yang Yi also wanted to cultivate his daughter's courage. Although the little girl has participated in many stage performances, but this kind of impromptu performance in front of a group of strange tourists requires a lot of courage. Perhaps she wanted to give it a try. Shishi's expression was now a little moved by her father's words. She shyly grabbed her father's finger with one hand and secretly touched the piano keys with the other. She hesitantly looked at her father and said, But I still don't play very well. It doesn't matter. No one will laugh at you. Yang Yi smiled and said, Moreover, look at that big brother just now. He didn't play very well. Didn't everyone like his performance? Didn't they all applaud him? I applauded too. Shishi's eyes wandered as she whispered. Well, come on, give it a try. Play your favorite and most familiar song. Even the birthday song is fine. Under her father's encouragement, Shishi finally sat on the piano stool. However, she was still a little embarrassed. She placed her two small hands on the black and white piano keys and looked at her father for help. At this time, there were already many tourists nearby who noticed this scene. Everyone saw an Asian little girl sitting on the piano stool. Moreover, her nervous appearance was a little pitiful. They spontaneously applauded for Shishi. Shishi looked to the side in surprise. Those kind smiles made the little girl nervous for a while, and then relaxed a little. Look, everyone is looking forward to your performance. Yang Yi said with a smile. Come on, Shishi. Dad believes in you. Yang Yi let go of Shishi's hand and gave her a last encouraging look. Then he took a little step back to give Shishi an independent performance space. Then he picked up the camera hanging around his neck and took 2 photos first. Then he prepared to record Shishi. Chapter 1271. After the encouraging applause, the train station returned to its original silence. It was as if everyone was listening to a concert, except for some announcements on the platform. They were all smiling and looking expectantly at the Asian girl sitting in front of the piano. Shishi's outfit today was very fresh and cute. Because of the warm weather in Germany, the girl didn't need to wear thick clothes. She wore a pink sports jacket and a pair of black slim pants. She didn't even need to wear a hat. The pink headband that matched the jacket combed her long hair. From the back, she looked elegant and natural. Moreover, the girl was born beautiful. With a serious expression on her delicate little face, it was enough to make people want to cherish her. Without further ado, Shishi sat in front of the piano attentively. Although she was still a little nervous, she had already mustered up her courage and began to gently press on the piano strings. Hey, it's to Alice. Yang Yi raised his eyebrows in surprise when he heard the first few notes. He played this song for Shishi before he played the song Snail for Shishi. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't particularly easy either. After all, the original version of To Alice had very high requirements, but the later version was much simpler. Yang Yi also gave Richard's version of To Alice to Shishi to practice. The girl liked this song very much. In the beginning, she played it messily, but after practicing for half a year, she could occasionally play it coherently. However, Yang Yi didn't expect Shishi to play such a song. This was the girl's first time playing the piano outside. Yang Yi was worried that she didn't have the confidence, so he only asked her to play a super simple song like the birthday song. In any case, Shishi's performance began. Her right foot gently stepped on the pedal, and the slender fingers of her two small hands danced on the piano keys like a butterfly. It looked very beautiful. If there weren't a few wrong notes, it would be even more beautiful. Shishi was still a little nervous. Not only did she play a few wrong notes, but she also played a little hurriedly. The melody was obviously a little fast. However, Yang Yi did not intend to guide her for the time being. He looked at the little girl expectantly, hoping that she would be able to adjust herself. You can do it, Shishi. You are Daddy's pride. Yang Yi thought to himself. However, at this moment, there was a bit of commotion in the spectator stands. It wasn't that Shishi played too badly. Although the little girl played the wrong notes and played a little too fast, no one would be so picky about a 7-year-old girl. The moving melody of To Alice was still very beautiful, and many knowledgeable tourists suddenly felt its extraordinariness. What song is this? People curiously asked their companions, thinking that they were just ignorant. However, the commotion did not stop because everyone realized that no one knew what song it was. It was Yang Yi's fault for being lazy and not releasing the good stuff. However, everyone's whispers were still politely maintained at a very low decibel level. It did not affect Shishi, who was focused on playing the piano. Shishi's playing condition was getting better and better. In the beginning, the little girl was indeed very nervous. Her fingers did not dare to press down hard, and she even played the wrong notes while trembling. If it were someone else, they might be even more nervous and even more afraid to play. However, Shishi felt her father's support behind her, so she persevered. The little girl's memory was very good. She did not need to look at the score at all. In addition, she had practiced this song for half a year. Shishi played it very skillfully. After playing for the first time, Shishi became calmer and calmer. However, the serious expression on her face eased slightly, and the rhythm of the music also returned to a normal level. All of a sudden, the gentle charm of To Alice was reflected. The people in the discussion quieted down and listened with fascination. There were even some people who just wanted to watch the fun who could not help but take out their phones to record. Yang Yi, who was standing behind Shishi, also revealed a gratified smile. She was indeed Yang Yi's daughter. Her character was tough enough. A competition-type player. Yang Yi thought of the evaluation of Shishi by teacher Xia Suqing, who taught Shishi's dance class in Huijia Primary School. His heart was brimming with pride for Shishi. Of course, it did not mean that Shishi played very well even if she played slowly. The little girl had only learned the piano for half a year. Many playing habits that required a lot of practice and accumulation to change still appeared in her. For example, when Shishi played the piano, her eyes could not help but look at the piano keys. Shishi had already worked hard to develop the habit of playing blindly under her father's request. However, she was still lacking in confidence. Her little head twisted and turned, looking left and right. She looked very serious, but this was also a sign of unprofessionalism. Other than that, Shishi did not know how to grasp the emotions of this song. It was not just To Alice. Most piano songs had emotional expressions, such as weak, very weak, gradually strong, light, gentle, and so on. However, at Shishi's age, it was almost impossible for her to understand so many complicated emotional changes, or what kind of emotional thoughts she should put into it. Therefore, the little girl only played according to the rhythm of her father's playing in her memory, imitating and playing mechanically. In this way, Shishi still had many shortcomings, but Yang Yi was satisfied enough. A 7-year-old girl who could play the piano bravely in public, and even play it fluently, what else could be asked of her? When Shishi was playing the piano, Tong Tong finally could not hold back. He broke free from his mother's hand and came closer. His two little hands grabbed the edge of the piano, and he curiously watched his sister play. It was not that he had not seen it before, but the scene today was special. Even Tong Tong felt that his sister had a special glow. This glow attracted the little guy, and he could not help but get closer to his sister. When the passers-by saw this loving scene, they all smiled. Of course, Sisi also finished playing very quickly. When she made a gesture to stop, The tourists next to her all laughed and applauded the little girl. Some people even shouted bravo and cheered loudly. She had just recovered from the world of music when she felt everyone's enthusiasm. This made the little girl a little embarrassed. She was happy and hurriedly got up, rushed to her father, and buried her little head in his arms. You played very well. Everyone is praising you. Yang Yi smiled and gently patted the little girl's head. He said softly, "Come on, give everyone a bow." She had gone to the concert with her parents before, so she knew what her father meant. The little girl raised her head a little shyly, and her father pulled her forward. They opened their hands and bowed gently to express their gratitude to the people who were smiling kindly. Everyone laughed. Some people were worried that she did not understand English or other foreign languages, so they directly used body language to encourage the little girl, giving her a big thumbs up. However, at this time, the tinkling sound of the piano came from behind them, and it ruined the atmosphere. However, when everyone looked over, they all smiled. It turned out that it was the little girl's younger brother who had curiously pressed on the piano keys. When little Momo realized that her little action had been discovered, she hurriedly retracted her little hand and hid it behind her back. It was as if she was deceiving herself. "Do you want to play the piano too?" Yang Yi asked him with a smile. Tong Tong shook his little head and hid behind his sister in embarrassment. He stuck out his big eyes and looked at his father with a smile. He was smart enough to whisper, "Papa, play." "Papa wants to play too." When she heard this, she was also interested. She held her little brother's little hand and jumped up and down with a smile. "Papa doesn't want to play." Yang Yi hurriedly waved his hand. He wanted to keep a low profile. However, the little girl was not satisfied. She pulled her father's hand and pulled him to the piano. She called out in a light and pleasant voice, "Papa wants to play. I want to hear Papa play." "Well, Tong Tong, you bad boy, you actually learned how to divert trouble." Chapter 1272. Just as she finished playing the piano, a group of people got off a train that had just stopped at the station. Some of them were carrying musical instruments, while some were empty-handed, but they were all talking and laughing. Among them there was an Asian face. If Yang Yi saw him, he would definitely recognize him as an acquaintance. However, Yang Yi had no time to pay attention to him, because he was being pestered by his daughter, who wanted him to play the piano once. "We can't hog the piano all the time. Other people want to play it," Yang Yi explained to the little girl helplessly. However, she did not agree. She pouted and protested. "No, Papa, it's not fair. I played the piano. And then you have to play too. Oui. The little girl was a little speechless, but the onlookers took over Shishi's words and started to jeer. Although the onlookers did not understand the conversation between Shishi and her father, when they saw the little girl pull her father to the piano, they already understood what was going on. As a matter of fact, they all smiled and applauded Yang Yi, and even encouraged him to try with words. Not only were they encouraging him, but they were also very curious about the level of a father who had taught his daughter so well. Yang Yi did not want to be in the limelight, but now he was also unable to refuse the kindness. He smiled helplessly at Shishi, stopped being shy, and sat on the piano stool. Everyone quieted down just like before, and waited for the performance to start. Shishi was also very happy. She pulled Tong Tong, skipped around to her father's left side, and stood next to the piano. The little girl did not forget to make a shoe gesture to her brother. After Yang Yi sat on the piano stool, he pondered for a while, thinking about what song to play. There were a lot of beautiful songs, such as the familiar Flight of the Bumblebee, the third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight, and many difficult piano pieces by Franz Liszt. Of course, there was also Maxim's Cubana Cubana. However, Yang Yi did not want to show off his skills. He felt that his purpose of sitting in front of the piano was not to win everyone's applause, but to set a good example for Shishi and even Tong Tong. In this way, the piano piece he had to choose was destined to be rich and colorful in the expression of emotions. Only in this way could it play a good role in guiding Shishi. Secondly, its difficulty could not be too low. Forget about the level of Ode to Alice. Yang Yi did not want to show off his skills, but it did not mean that he wanted to hide his skills. This was meaningless. I got it. The Crave. Yang Yi thought of this piano piece that appeared in the movie The Pianist at Sea, which he liked very much in his previous life. This song appeared in the plot of the piano duel between 1900 and the founder of jazz, Jerry. In the movie, both Jerry and 1900 played this song, and Jerry played it so well that 1900 was in tears. It was a composition by Jerry in real life, but it was worth mentioning that this was not a song to show off his skills. Although the two of them used it to duel, the real show of their skills started after Jerry said something that made 1900 angry, and then they took out the other songs again. This, The Crave, was a very classic jazz piano piece, and it was also a song that Yang Yi liked very much. The difficulty was not high, but the emotions it expressed were very wonderful. Just like its name, hope, enthusiasm, and the free soul of jazz music, the thoughts it expressed were also positive, and it was very worthy of Yang Yi's performance. It was a long speech, but Yang Yi only thought for a few seconds. He began to raise his other hand, paused slightly, and began to play. At the beginning, the melody was very light, and the surrounding tourists could not help but feel refreshed. Of course, the way Yang Yi pressed the strings with ease, and the smooth and beautiful music that made people feel comfortable listening to it, also made many people in the station who had a certain level of musical literacy stunned. Not simple. Even the station in Leipzig did not have so many professionals, but not being able to play professionally did not mean that they did not know how to appreciate it. Many Europeans had listened to countless concerts since they were young, and their ability to appreciate music was certainly not ordinary. As for the tourists nearby, when they saw Yang Yi's fingers begin to dance, they could deeply feel the power of Yang Yi's piano skills. It was not as fast as playing a song like Flight of the Bumblebee, but Yang Yi's fingers were very light, as if he was not playing the piano, but his fingers were gently dancing with the rhythm, giving people an indescribable feeling of naturalness, smoothness, and softness. The Crave was a light piece, and the rhythm of the notes expressed the desire for beauty. As the rhythm jumped, it was as if a relaxed and joyful state was diffusing like the fragrance of flowers, making the audience feel indescribable happiness. And when Yang Yi played, it was precisely this happiness that was expressed. His height was not too conspicuous in the West, but when he played the piano, his body exuded a kind of elegant confidence. His strong face gently swayed, as if expressing the tenderness of the music, and even catering to the characteristics of jazz music. Yang Yi's wantonly twisting body also conveyed a kind of freedom concept. The beauty of music could make people cry, and this did not only exist in novels and movies. Some people who could really understand music could not help but close their eyes and listen to it intoxicatedly. Then they could not help but feel a little moved, and 2 lines of hot tears would fall from the enthusiast's eyes. Of course, very few people, and no one saw it. Not to mention the other audience members, even Murphy, who was sitting next to their luggage, could not help but close her eyes and listen to it intoxicatedly. She was not moved, only happy and excited. This is my man. The main audience members were Shi and Tong Tong. Tong Tong did not know how to appreciate it, but her sister was enraptured by it. She seemed to be infected by the enthusiasm of the music, and the little girl's face was filled with a sweet smile. Papa played the piano so well. Beautiful music always made people addicted to it, and they even forgot the time. Yang Yi played the entire song for nearly 5 minutes, but after the song was played, some of the audience members were still not satisfied, and did not come back to their senses for a long time. Some reacted quickly and gave applause, but it was very sparse, and after a while, it gradually became denser. In the end, everyone in the waiting area stood up and enthusiastically applauded Yang Yi. Yang Yi stood up and bowed to thank everyone. At this time, he was surprised to find that he was surrounded by people, as if everyone in the waiting area had gathered. But Yang Yi played so well that even if he had already thanked everyone still applauded and smiled at him with the most sincere respect. A fat German even praised Yang Yi loudly in German. Yang Yi smiled slightly, cupped his hands in greeting, and thanked him in German. This Asian who can play the piano so well also knows German? Suddenly, Yang Yi received more praise. Mo Fei couldn't help but come up to him and give him a big hug. Shi also ran up happily and hugged her father with her brother. Papa, you are super awesome. The little girl's little face was red with excitement. Tong Tong, like a parrot, also shouted like her sister, Papa is super awesome. The two little guys looked at their father with admiration. Yang Yi suddenly felt that his idea of setting an example for the children had been realized. He smiled, held Murphy's waist, and patted the heads of the two little guys with a smile, and said, Then you have to work hard in the future and be as awesome as your father. After a short hustle and bustle, the tourists did not bother too much. They all laughed and rushed to their respective trains. The train station seemed to be quiet again. But at this time, an Asian man in casual clothes with an extraordinary temperament finally found the opportunity to walk up to Yang Yi with a smile. Yang Yi, long time no see. Chapter 1273. How could he meet someone he knew at a train station in Germany on a whim? Yang Yi couldn't believe his eyes. After being stunned for a moment, he finally reacted. However, he was still happy. He opened his arms and hugged the other person. He smiled and said, Teacher Jian, why are you in Leipzig too? Yes, the person who called out to Yang Yi at Leipzig station was Jian Yifan, who had just gotten off the train with his band. Jian Yifan and Yang Yi first met at a coffee shop. P.S. See Chapter 236 and 237 for details. At that time, Yang Yi's piano skills were only at a professional level. Jian Yifan was a guest professor at Jiangchuan University, and a very famous pianist in the country and abroad. He was the first real piano master that Yang Yi knew. Of course, Jian Yifan was generous with his teachings, which benefited Yang Yi a lot. This was also why Yang Yi respectfully called him Teacher Jian. Later, when Yang Yi was studying at Jiangchuan, he met Jian Yifan again and learned piano from him for a period of time. That was how his skills improved by leaps and bounds, reaching the level he was at today. Yang Yi, I heard your performance just now. Your piano skills have improved quite a lot. Jian Yifan first praised him, then smiled and answered Yang Yi's question. Our band has a performance in Leipzig in 3 days, so we just arrived here. I didn't expect to hear such beautiful music when I passed by the station waiting room. Of course, the two of them were communicating in Mandarin. However, Jian Yifan had brought his band members along, so he couldn't just leave them hanging. At first, Jian Yifan wanted to be Yang Yi's translator. However, later on he realized that Yang Yi could not only speak English, but could also communicate naturally and fluently in German. As such, he decided to speak German with his band members, which he was more familiar with. Some of Jian Yifan's friends in the band played cello, while others played wind instruments. However, they were very interested in the piece Yang Yi just played. They didn't hear Shi play, and they only heard half of Yang Yi's performance. When they found out that the jazz piano piece was composed by Yang Yi himself, they were all surprised. Haha, let me formally introduce you. This is Yang Yi. Although he's not in the classical music industry, he's a very famous pop musician in China. His wife is also a singer, one of China's top singers. Jian Yifan proudly introduced Yang Yi to his friends. He even introduced Murphy. He's also composed some English songs. Do you still remember Jingle Bells that became popular in the past 2 years? That was also composed by him. Jian Yifan knew Yang Yi quite well. After all, Yang Yi had been in the limelight in the news for the past few years. Even though Jian Yifan rarely paid attention to the pop music industry, he would still take a few glances at his acquaintances in the newspaper. Jian Yifan did not mention Yang Yi's other pop songs. He only mentioned Jingle Bells because they didn't usually listen to pop music. It was just that they had a performance last Christmas, and after the performance, they gathered together to improvise this song, so they were more familiar with it. Jingle Bells was also written by Yang Yi. The few Westerners in the band widened their eyes in surprise. Yang Yi smiled slightly. He was not overly modest in front of these people. He calmly replied, "My English name is Leon." This instantly caused them to sigh with emotion. When Shi saw so many foreigners appear, she was a little nervous and snuggled into her mother's arms. She was very curious about what her father was talking about with them. However, even her mother could not understand their conversation. The little girl could only blink her big eyes in confusion. When she saw these people exclaim, She seemed to feel her father's excellence. Unknowingly, the little girl felt very proud. Of course, no matter how great Yang Yi's achievements in the pop music industry were, after all, they were not working in the same field. A few exclamations were enough. What was left was for Yang Yi to have a simple exchange with them about the music just now. After that, Jian Yifan wanted to invite Yang Yi and his family to watch their band's performance. Unfortunately, Jian Yifan's performance was 3 days later. Yang Yi's family did not have that much time to stay. It was not a problem for the train to be rescheduled. Yang Yi did not lack the money. However, the problem was that Yang Yi wanted to bring Murphy and the children back to China after touring Paris. If they went straight back to Anqing, they could at least make it back in time for the Chinese New Year. Therefore, this time he could only regretfully decline. After a short meeting, Jian Yifan and his band did not stay for long. They hurriedly carried their instruments to the hotel they were staying at. The waiting hall of the train station returned to its usual peace. No one was sitting in front of the piano playing music. Yang Yi and Murphy also brought the children back to their seats and sat down. They patiently waited for the train that would arrive in less than an hour. I didn't expect to meet Teacher Jian here, Murphy said to Yang Yi with emotion. Yeah, I know that he often performs in Vienna, Austria. This time he was probably invited to Leipzig, Yang Yi said to Murphy with a smile. Teacher Jian's mental state is still very good. I can't tell that he's almost 60 years old at all, Murphy said with admiration. The two were bored waiting for the train, so they chatted casually. Shishi's eyes darted around. She had been holding it in for a long time. Finally, there was a small pause in the conversation between her parents. Then she hurriedly interrupted. Papa, let me tell you. Just now, when I was playing the piano, I played it wrong at the beginning. Shishi burrowed into her father's arms and snuggled up to him, directly taking over his body. Papa knows the one you played. Yang Yi smiled and directly listed all the mistakes to Shishi. Oh, Papa, don't talk about this. I'm not talking about this. The little girl shook her butt shyly and pouted her small mouth saying, I thought everyone would laugh at me, but they didn't, so I wasn't afraid. Why would they laugh at you? You played very well. Yang Yi smiled and rubbed the little girl's head. With Shishi chatting together, time always passed quickly. After a while, their train arrived. Murphy held Tong Tong, who was already sleepy in her mother's arms, and Yang Yi carried the luggage bag and pulled Shishi onto the train to warmer Paris. Originally, it was a very happy day, but for some reason after getting on the train, Yang Yi began to feel a little absent-minded. After he arranged for Murphy and the children to rest in the carriage, he took the thermos out of the dining car to get hot water. Through the window, the city lights still illuminated the night sky. However, there seemed to be a mass of dark clouds covering the southwest sky. Did he see it wrong? Chapter 1274. When the train arrived in Paris, it was already the next morning. The sky outside the window had just begun to brighten, but the sky was very blue. A few white clouds floated lazily in the sky. It seemed a little different from the serious air pollution in Paris that was reported in the news. In fact, the smog in Paris was different from that in Beijing. It was also polluted, but the blue sky could still be seen from the ground. However, Yang Yi still secretly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the blue sky. Where are the dark clouds? He wondered if there was something wrong with his senses yesterday. However, no matter whether there was a problem or not, Yang Yi was still careful and secretly vigilant. This was his habit in his previous life. It was also a lesson he learned after being secretly photographed by LVU in this life. He had re-established his vigilance. However, Yang Yi did not show it. He still laughed and looked at Murphy and the children's dance. When they got up in the carriage, Murphy was in a very good mood. She woke up Shishi and Tong Tong and started to dance the samba happily. She also sang, Come to Paris, buy a dress. Come to Paris, buy a bag. Come to Paris, buy shoes. She was so happy that she was like a 3-year-old child who had never seen the world. Mo Fei's happiness also infected the two little guys who had just woken up and were still rubbing their eyes with a confused look on their faces. Cece's two little hands were intertwined, and she stretched forward. Her small body could also be pressed into a beautiful curve. Then she looked at her mother and giggled. She even laughed so hard that her little brother fell to the ground. The train had already arrived at the station, so Yang-yi and Murphy simply tidied up the two little guys and got off the train together. Let's go to the hotel first, take a shower, change our clothes, and then go shopping. Murphy walked in front excitedly and ordered. Don't worry, we still have luggage. Yang-yi did not know whether to laugh or cry and stopped Murphy. This little guy wanted to go shopping. Oh, that's right. Murphy retracted her footsteps in embarrassment. However, although Emo Fei was too impatient today, Cece liked her mother very much. Just now, the little girl was also very happy to be with her mother. She waved her hands and walked in front of her mother with a straight step. It was rare for Shishi to be in sync with her mother. It was not difficult to collect the luggage. Yang-yi and the others came to the front of the luggage cart and handed over the receipt. Soon, the staff brought down the 2 suitcases for Yang-yi and the others. However, while waiting for the luggage, Yang-yi's ears twitched and he noticed a trace of movement. He looked into the distance and saw a few figures hiding behind a parked freight train in the distance. Of course, from Yang-yi's angle, he could not see those people. However, Yang-yi's eyes were very sharp. He could vaguely see the ankles and calves that were exposed through the gaps under the car. Thieves. Yang-yi guessed secretly. It should be. They came so early, probably waiting for the staff to not notice, and then secretly steal some of the goods in the freight train. However, Yang-yi did not intend to be a hero. He did not have the heart to be a hero in the first place. Now that he had his wife and children, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. So Yang-yi only took a glance, then retracted his gaze. He took his 2 suitcases as if nothing had happened, thanked the staff, and left with Murphy and the others. However, before he left, Yang-yi took the opportunity to glance in that direction again. A face flashed past, and a pair of gloomy eyes fell into his line of sight. Yang-yi had already turned around. He smiled and gestured for Cece and the others to sit on the trolley. Then he pushed the 2 little fellows forward. However, the vicious look in his eyes still remained in his memory. Faintly, Yang-yi felt a little uneasy. When they returned to the crowded train station, the noisy and lively atmosphere drove away a little of the haze in Yang-yi's heart. After all, this was Paris, an international metropolis and the transportation hub of Europe. Even in the morning, there were still many people at the train station. Regardless of whether they had gathered from all over the world or were preparing to leave by train, the huge train station was filled to the brim. Yang-yi smiled and joked with Shishi and Tong Tong. Okay, we're going to get on the escalator. Passengers who have arrived at the station, please get off. Shishi was amused by her father. She giggled and even grabbed the handle of the luggage. She said mischievously to her father, Passengers who have arrived at the station don't get off, hee. Tong Tong didn't know whether he understood or not, but he felt that the conversation between his sister and his father was very interesting. He imitated his sister and hugged the handle. He giggled and said, I'm not getting off, I'm not getting off. Yang-yi helplessly patted Shishi's head and said with a smile, Okay, seriously, get off. It's not safe to sit on the escalator like this. Shishi, be a good role model for your little brother. Shishi didn't really want to be lazy. The little girl was very obedient. She stepped back and jumped down from the luggage. After all, the advantage of having long legs was greater. Little brother, get off too. Shishi was very eager to help. She wrapped her arms around the handle and hugged Tong Tong's armpits from the front. You're not getting off, Tong Tong muttered. However, his mouth didn't match his heart. He leaned over and hugged his sister's neck to let her carry him down. You're so heavy. Little brother, you've gained weight again. Shishi yelled as she carried Tong Tong down. Tong Tong giggled with his sister and rubbed his hands on his body in embarrassment. However, after they got on the escalator, Shishi suddenly turned around and pulled her father's hand. She said weakly, Papa, I want to go to the bathroom. That's right. The little girl woke up in the morning and wanted to get off in a hurry. Me too. I want to pee too. Tong Tong openly acted like a hooligan. He stuck out his little belly and said in a clear voice after his sister, You want to go to the bathroom? Yang Yi looked at the entrance of the bus station in front of them. He pondered for a moment and said, "Then let's go back to the waiting hall. It's not easy to find a bathroom outside. Also, I don't know if there will be a traffic jam if we take a taxi to the hotel." Murphy smiled and said, "That's a good idea. By the way, we can take out a towel and wipe Shishi and Tongtong's faces. They haven't washed their faces and brushed their teeth since they woke up this morning." After making a happy decision, Yang Yi led Murphy and the children down the escalator. There were quite a lot of toilets in such a big train station. However, because Cece and little Momo wanted to wash their faces and brush their teeth, Yang Yi simply took them to the most remote toilet. This was the passage leading to the staff. Not to mention that there was no one in the toilet. There were usually very few passengers who came here in a hurry. "Go in with Mama. Papa will be outside. I'll take care of your luggage." Yang Yi opened his carry-on luggage and took out a towel, a toothbrush, and other toiletries for Murphy. Then he smiled at Shishi and Tong Tong. Tong Tong was too young. It was fine for a 2-year-old boy to go to the ladies' room. However, Shishi could not go to the men's room. Yang Yi was on guard. Murphy led the 2 children into the restroom while laughing and chatting happily. Yang Yi stayed outside and guarded the 2 suitcases. However, when Yang Yi scanned the waiting hall out of habit, he made an unexpected discovery. Yang Yi's gaze fell on the people in gray windbreakers who stood in groups of 2s and 3s around the public telephones. He faintly felt that something was wrong. Why are there so many people dressed like this? The haze in Yang Yi's heart, which had been suppressed by him, suddenly shrouded him again. Chapter 1275. Seeing such a scene, Yang Yi suddenly felt a sense of danger. But before he could identify it, an electric scooter driven by a cleaner in the station entered his sight. Coincidentally, the scooter was parked next to the 2 men in gray windbreakers. Did they realize something was wrong? Yang Yi creased his eyebrows. But soon, Yang Yi saw that on the electric scooter, someone lifted the curtain and handed 2 long black bags to the 2 men in gray windbreakers. The 2 men in gray windbreakers took the opportunity to hide the bags in their windbreakers. Their movements were so fast that only Yang Yi could see it clearly. F***ck. Yang Yi suddenly felt goosebumps all over his body. Looking at the shape of the bulging bags, Yang Yi could guess what was inside. Could it be? Coincidentally, the electric scooter turned around, and Yang Yi's gaze fell on the faces of the 2 men in the cleaner's uniform on the scooter. They had black hair and yellow skin, but unlike East Asians, their faces were more 3-dimensional and curvaceous. Their eyebrows were well-defined, and their noses were high. They looked a bit like Caucasians. But even without their signature sideburns, Yang Yi could still recognize them. F***ck. Why are these lunatics here? Yang Yi thought anxiously. Yang Yi was very familiar with these people in his previous life, but that was only when he was carrying out a mission. After all, wealth comes from danger. But if it were not for the mission, Yang Yi would not have wanted to provoke them. The electric scooter was still turning around, and Yang Yi also saw the eyes of the other person sitting in the passenger seat. Although there was no contact between the pair of malicious eyes, it was enough to make Yang Yi shudder. It's him. Yang Yi had seen this pair of eyes before, just behind the freight train. One-on-one, Yang Yi was not afraid of these guys at all. Even if he could not handle them, he could easily escape. But now, Yang Yi was no longer a lone wolf. He still had the comfort of his family on his shoulders. When Yang Yi thought of Murphy, Shishi, and Tong Tong who were still washing up in the bathroom, his heart sank. Damn it! Why didn't these people go to Stockholm? Why did he come to Paris? Of course, Yang Yi also knew why. If it were him, he wouldn't have chosen to attack the heavily guarded Stockholm either. It would have been better if they had just gone out directly. As long as they got into the taxi, whatever happened at the train station behind them, whether it was a flood or a landslide, it had nothing to do with them. She shouldn't have suggested going to the toilet at the station. Or perhaps they should not have stayed in Leipzig yesterday. If the train had not stopped yesterday, they would have arrived in Paris last night. And today they would have been shopping instead of appearing here. Of course, regret wouldn't solve the problem. Yang Yi quickly calmed down. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his vision became much sharper. Can we still go out at this time? Yang Yi's brain started to calculate precisely like a computer. He turned his head to look at the station door at the top of the escalator in the distance, thinking about how long it would take for him to bring Murphy and the children out without any luggage, and without alerting the enemy. But soon, Yang Yi's heart sank again. This was because he saw the men in gray coats start to move. Yang Yi temporarily ignored the movements of the others. He could clearly see that there were about 3 groups of 6 people, and they seemed to be casually getting on the escalator. They want to block the door. It's too late. Yang Yi saw that the men on the escalator had started to lift up their coats and take out their black cloth bags. When they were about to take out their weapons, he closed his eyes, turned around, and walked resolutely to the ladies' room. When he opened the door of the ladies' room, the sound of gunshots rang out like firecrackers during the new year. The screams were still a little slow, but Yang Yi had already pushed his suitcase into the ladies' room. After he closed the door, all the noise outside seemed to have been blocked outside. The 2 little guys had finished brushing their teeth. Murphy was wiping Tong Tong's face, and Shishi was standing next to them, secretly laughing. When she saw her father come in, Shishi mischievously screamed, "Ah, Papa, you can't come in. This is the ladies' room." When Tong Tong heard the noise, she couldn't help but push away her mother's hand and towel. She looked at her father and giggled. Yang Yi's face was cold at first, but when he saw the 2 children, he couldn't help but soften a little. He squeezed out a smile, rubbed Shishi's little head, and said with a smile, "There's no one else here. What are you afraid of?" However, Yang Yi didn't have time to play with the children. He first got into a cubicle, stepped on the toilet, and reached out to push the top of the cubicle. "What's going on?" Murphy was still smiling and wanted to ask Yang Yi why he came in, but when she saw Yang Yi's actions, she suddenly froze. After a while, she realized that something was wrong, so she quickly walked over and asked. Although the top of the cubicle could be removed, the space inside was very narrow. It was usually used by repairmen to repair the circuit, so there was no way to hide. However, there was still a way. Yang Yi changed to another cubicle and used the multifunction key in his hand to unscrew the screw of the air vent. Fortunately, because the station was relatively large, it required a good ventilation design. Therefore, even though it was a cubicle, the air vent was designed to be very large. The air vent was 600 mm x 600 mm square, and the air duct was 800 mm x 600 mm, which was enough to allow an adult of a normal size to crawl in. Of course, it was possible to crawl in, but it was impossible to crawl from the air duct to other places like in the movies. After all, there were other devices blocking the air ducts. Moreover, Yang Yi didn't know if the air duct would fall down as he crawled. Something happened outside. "There's a KBFZ. There's no time to explain. Listen to my arrangements. Don't worry, as long as I'm here, nothing will happen to you," Yang Yi whispered into Murphy's ear. At this time, Murphy obviously knew what Yang Yi was talking about. Her eyes suddenly revealed a panicked expression. She was just an ordinary person, so how could she not be afraid? Murphy's eyes turned red, and she bit her lower lip tightly. She was afraid that she would cry out in fear and frighten the 2 children. However, she was really panicking, and her whole body was weak. She could only hold on to Yang Yi's arm and try her best to support herself. "Don't panic. You still have children." Murphy tried her best to remind herself that she had to be strong for the children. Yang Yi looked at Murphy's expression and deliberately smiled casually. He said, "Don't worry, your husband is so powerful. I've seen all kinds of big situations. I promise that I'll bring you out of danger." "Really?" Murphy looked at Yang Yi pitifully. At this moment, she only had Yang Yi as her support. "It's true." Yang Yi nodded firmly. Although Yang Yi was whispering in Murphy's ear, he did not dare to relax at all. He placed the 2 suitcases on top of each other, and stacked them on top of each other on top of the toilet bowl under the air vent. "Come on, honey, you climb up first, and then I'll bring Shishi and Tong Tong up. You take them to hide inside first." Yang Yi estimated that those people in gray trench coats would take some time to control the situation, so they would not be able to take care of them for the time being. However, Yang Yi did not dare to delay. and began to make arrangements. I don't have any strength. Murphy gritted her teeth and persisted. She took off her high-heeled shoes and climbed up the suitcase with the help of Yang Yi. However, her body was trembling and she could not stand steadily. With tears in her eyes, she whispered to Yang Yi with a sobbing tone. Papa, what is Mom doing? Shi and Tong Tong curiously stood by the side and looked at their parents in confusion. We're playing a little game. Yang Yi asked Murphy to hold on to the toilet's partition. With a leap, he also sat on top of the partition. Then he took the time to turn his head and smiled at Shi. He pretended to be relaxed and said. At this time, Yang Yi's terrifying arm strength finally came in handy. He bent down and clamped Murphy's slender waist with both hands. With a gentle hug he lifted Murphy up. This was enough for half of Murphy's body to reach into the pipe. Wow. Papa is so awesome. Shi stood below and looked up with a face full of admiration. She praised as if she was watching an acrobatic performance. Tong Tong looked at his sister, and then looked at Mom, who was trying her best to climb inside. He pouted and said, But Mom is also super awesome. Perhaps because she heard the children's praise, Murphy's body, which had been paralyzed with fear, surged with strength and she tried her best to climb up. Fortunately, the air pipe and the ceiling of the station were very stable and did not shake at all. The quality of foreign construction was indeed incomparable to that of domestic construction. Sit here first. Later, I'll let Shi and the others go in from here. Then, I'll hold you and let you climb through. Yang Yi explained. He jumped down from the toilet partition. Now he had a few words to say to Shi. Yang Yi squatted down and pulled the red string from Shi's and Tong Tong's necks. He took out the Buddha statue that he had made for them before, and let the two little guys hold it in their hands. Then, he hugged Tong Tong with his left hand, and Shi with his right hand and gently kissed their little faces. Shi, I want you to help me with the game we're playing today. Yang Yi said softly as he looked at the side of his daughter's smiling face, who made his heart filled with tenderness. Yes, Yang Yi had already made up his mind. Unless there was no way to hide it, Yang Yi would stand in front of the children like an indestructible barrier. Not only would he shelter them from the wind and rain, but he would also not let the storm outside leave a trace in their young hearts. Even if the smart Shi could guess it, as long as she did not see it, Yang Yi was not worried that it would affect the little girl's mental health. Okay, Papa. What do you want me to help with? Shi blinked her big watery eyes and asked her father in a clear voice. Chapter 1276. Because we're going to play a game of hide and seek today. You have to help me hide in the pipe above. You also have to help me take good care of your brother. Don't let him be afraid, don't cry, and don't talk too loudly, okay? Yang Yi's ears were pricked up, and he spoke a little fast. After the door was closed, the gunshots outside became very faint, and Shi and the others did not feel anything. However, Yang Yi could still tell if someone was approaching. Just now, there was chaos in the staff area. Not only were there gunshots, but there were also screams. It was very noisy, and Yang Yi was very worried. Fortunately, no one had approached them for the time being, probably because it was too remote. Hearing her father's words, the smart little girl still felt that something was wrong. Her delicate little eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and she hesitantly muttered. Then. But. Shi took a step closer, snuggled her little body into her father's arms, hugged her father's neck with two small hands, pouted her little mouth and whispered, But Papa, I'm scared too. For some reason, the little girl was very nervous. Maybe she also felt the danger from her parents' expressions. However, at this time, the little boy next to them giggled. Tong Tong did not feel anything, and thought that his father was going to play a fun game. He puffed out his little chest, waved his two little hands and shouted excitedly, Don't be scared, don't be scared. Shoo. Yang Yi quickly put up a finger to signal Tong Tong to be quiet. He pricked up his ears, and after confirming that there was still no movement outside, he said to Shi, we are just playing a game. What is there to be scared of? Also, isn't your father always here? Shi looked at her father, hesitated for a while, and then reluctantly nodded. Yang Yi smiled, and let Shishi hold up the Buddha statue in her hands. After he adjusted the volume for the little girl, he removed the earphones from the back of the Buddha statue and put them on the little girl. The current Buddha statue was no longer the original model. Since Yang Yi had nothing to do in the past 2 years, he had modified it to make it more exquisite. For example, this kind of equipment that could be inserted into the Buddha statue could be used as a miniature loudspeaker and could be taken out as an earphone. This took a lot of Yang Yi's time and effort, but it was definitely useful. In a situation like this, using earphones could reduce the risk of being discovered if the sound suddenly came out. Do you still remember how Daddy taught you how to use this thing? Yang Yi said softly. Press it gently like this and you'll be able to talk. Shishi looked at her father in confusion, but she still nodded. Yang Yi also took out a wireless earphone and stuffed it into his ear. Then he opened the GPS program of these Buddha statues on his phone and waved his phone at Shishi. You'll be up there later. If there's anything you want to report to Daddy, you can use this to tell Daddy. Daddy will be down there. Then we'll be like playing a spy game. Secretly, don't let anyone find out, okay? Yang Yi knew that the current situation was a big challenge for Shishi, but at this time, he could only hope that Shishi could be strong. He gently rubbed the little girl's head, looked at Shishi with anticipation and said softly, "Help Daddy take care of your little brother. Let's play this game together, okay?" The little girl looked weak and helpless now, but she still held her father's finger, pouted her little mouth, and nodded gently. Remember Daddy's words, Shishi. If it's inconvenient for Daddy to respond when you ask Daddy, don't worry. Daddy will gently tap 3 times like this. Yang Yi's finger tapped the phone's microphone 3 times gently. He smiled at Shishi and said, "You don't have to worry, because this means that Daddy has already told you that Daddy heard what you said. Wait a moment and I'll give you an answer." Shishi's rosy little mouth was slightly open. The little girl, who was usually talkative, did not know what to say at this moment. She could only nod foolishly. Yang Yi reminded her of a few more things to take note of, then deliberately revealed a hearty smile. He gently clapped his hands and said, "Okay, let's play this game together." He first picked up Shishi and stuffed her into the ventilation duct with her face facing the outside. Fortunately, because it was winter, the air conditioning system was not turned on. It was just a normal ventilation system, so it was not very cold inside. However, Yang Yi still gave Shishi and Tong Tong an extra jacket in advance. "Daddy!" In the duct, the little girl's eyes were sparkling, but they seemed to be a little misty. The rims of her eyes were red, and she called out softly, "It's okay. Everything will be fine." Yang Yi smiled and gave the little girl a thumbs up, asking her to crawl a little further inside. After that, it was Tong Tong's turn. After Yang Yi stuffed the little guy into the duct, he pinched Tong Tong's nose and said with a smile, "Now that we're playing the game, we can't talk loudly or cry, okay? TSK, Daddy believes that you're a man, and you're also very good." Tong Tong was not afraid at all. He was in the mood to play, so he just shrunk his neck, dodged his father's big hand, and then giggled with his father. After that, Yang Yi also sent Murphy to the children's side. Murphy was already trying hard to hold back her tears. Just now, when she was in the duct, she could clearly hear the gunshots outside. She already knew that Yang Yi was telling the truth, and she was even more afraid. You're not coming up?" Murphy asked hurriedly when she saw Yang Yi pick up the back cover of the air duct, and was about to install it after he carried her over. "I'll watch from below. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." As Yang Yi spoke, he stretched out his hand and pulled out the Buddha statue from Murphy's neck, indicating that she should put on the headphones. In such a hurry, it was already good that Yang Yi was considerate, and it was inevitable that he would be flustered. But hubby, when Murphy heard that Yang Yi wanted to protect them, she was touched and worried at the same time. She was so anxious that tears rolled down her cheeks, and she softly choked with sobs. "Don't cry, you won't look good if you continue to cry." Yang Yi was still in the mood to joke. He stuffed Murphy's head back into the duct and smiled. "Don't worry, your hubby is powerful. My skills are not comparable to those small fries outside. I'll be down there so I can adapt to the situation. But I don't want you don't fight with them, okay?" Murphy thought that Yang Yi wanted to get rid of the evil for the people, so she pitifully begged. After all, Yang Yi's previous identity was an upright and plain-spoken soldier. But how could Murphy know that Yang Yi had never thought of risking his life, and he did not have the righteousness of his predecessor? The current him was very realistic, and considered everything very carefully. If it were not for the people he loved the most in danger, Yang Yi would never act rashly. How could it be so easy to be a hero? There were countless people in gray coats outside, and they were all lunatics with guns. Yang Yi was not stupid enough to think that he could not be killed like Ultraman, and that he could turn the tide and save the world. He had a mortal body, and a bullet could knock him down. Moreover, Yang Yi knew that if he fell, Murphy and the children would be exposed to danger. Therefore, no matter what, Yang Yi couldn't risk the lives of himself and his loved ones for a group of people who had nothing to do with him. Wasn't it the police's job to catch the bad guys? Don't worry, I won't be a hero. I will just stay here and protect you. Yang Yi comforted her softly. After he comforted Murphy, he began to use the multifunction keyring to screw up the air vent cover. After the cover was closed, the bathroom seemed to become quiet again. Yang Yi's eyes became sharp again. He looked around, and his head was spinning quickly. Yang Yi had already thought about it. First of all, he could not stay in the women's bathroom, because he would get too little information about the outside world. Moreover, this kind of defense was very passive, and the risk was very high. It would be best if he hid outside, and as long as someone approached the bathroom, he would take action and nip the danger in the bud. But before he went out, Yang Yi felt that he had to find a suitable weapon first. Yang Yi's most powerful weapon was his knife skills, followed by various assassination weapons and guns. Of course, now that he had integrated the kung fu of this body, his close combat ability could not be underestimated. But after all, the opponent had a gun. But where could he find a weapon? In Europe, he had to go through all kinds of security checks. Besides a 2 to 3 centimeters long spike on his key ring, he had nothing else. Chapter 1277. It would be great if he had a knife. With a knife, Yang Yi's confidence could be raised to the point of arrogance. But this was just wishful thinking. In the toilet of the train station, where could he find a knife? Yang Yi's eyes wandered around the only 2 trolley boxes. He was thinking about whether to remove the trolley bars, but even if he removed them, they would not be sharp enough. He did not have more time to polish them. However, when he thought of the word sharp, Yang Yi thought of something. He opened the zipper of the suitcase and took out a beautifully packaged wooden box. After opening it, a pair of exquisitely carved crystal high heels appeared in his hands, sparkling under the light. That's right, it was the pair of crystal high heels that Murphy had bought when she was shopping with Maria in Göteborg. They could only be admired as a piece of art. Not to mention how expensive the material of this pair of high heels was. The shape of the heels was more than 15 centimeters high. Moreover, the heels were very thin and sharp. If he was stepped on by this pair of high heels, forget it. Let's not think about it. Yang Yi now had his eyes on this pair of high heels, which were 18 centimeters long. Obviously, with such a length, slender, and sharp, in the hands of an expert like Yang Yi, it was enough to be used as a military knife. Honey, I'm sorry. Later, I'll buy you 10 more pairs of crystal high heels. Yang Yi said in his heart. He exerted strength in his hands, and directly broke the shoe into 2 pieces from the waist of the shoe. In this way, he could still hold the smooth and round upper part of the heel and exert strength. If this long sharp thorn were to pierce down at a relatively fast speed, it would be fatal. After making a military knife, Yang Yi put the remaining half of the shoe and the other intact crystal high heel back into the box. After tidying up and stuffing the trolley box into the innermost compartment, Yang Yi prepared to go out and investigate the situation. Before going out, Yang Yi whispered to Murphy through the headset, "All right, I'll go out and take a look. Don't worry, I'll be fine." Murphy's voice was very soft as it came through the earpiece. In order not to worry Yang Yi, she suppressed her urge to cry and said softly, You have to be careful too." When Yang Yi pushed open the door, he carefully used Murphy's mirror to look around. However, when he really walked out, He could feel the completely different atmosphere and the smell of blood outside. Yang Yi realized that all the cells in his body were trembling. It wasn't nervousness or fear. It was excitement. Are you thirsting for battle? Yang Yi said to himself in his heart. However, he remained calm and reminded himself. Don't forget that you are no longer alone. You are no longer alone in this world. Yang Yi avoided the location of the surveillance cameras. This was his habit. Every time he went to a place, he would look around and remember the location and angle of all the surveillance cameras. After walking out of the toilet for some distance, Yang Yi hid behind a potted plant and used the mirror to secretly check the situation outside. Just as Yang Yi had guessed, the waiting hall of the station was in a mess. All the tourists and station staff were detained here. Moreover, whether it was in the hall or upstairs, there were gunmen in gray coats watching over them. There are about 17, 18 people here. However, there should be some people who are hiding somewhere. Yang Yi counted silently. This was not a movie. There were still some people lying in a pool of blood on the ground. Looking at their clothes, some of them were station guards, some of them were station staff, and some of them were tourists. Quite a number of them died, but there were still some who were struggling and crying out in pain. Because of this, some people mustered up their courage and foolishly walked toward the men in gray. Although the station was filled with cries, screams, and noises, and it was difficult for Yang Yi to hear what they were talking about. Judging from their gestures, these silly people were trying to ask the executioners to rescue the wounded who were still struggling. Yang Yi's expression was as cold as it was in his previous life, but he sighed in his heart. How naive. Don't get yourself involved. Perhaps Yang Yi would still be so cold that he would not sacrifice his own life, and that of his family for these people. However, after living as an ordinary person for the past few years, he still had the compassion of an ordinary person. Seeing that the war did not spread to his side, Yang Yi took out his mobile phone and checked the news about today's incident. He had to say that the Western TV and media reports were really impressive. Yang Yi sent people to set up a foreign version of micro-broadcasting and Facebook. The official media accounts above were also constantly following up on the progress of the incident. XXXX took hostages at the Paris train station and shouted at the French and American presidents to ask for the release of 1,000 felons from Island X. Yang Yi saw this and sighed in his heart. Sure enough, they are not easy to deal with. How can I be so unlucky to encounter the most difficult group of tough bones in the world? There were also moving pictures. Yang Yi could see that the train station was surrounded by the French military and police. The media's helicopters were also hovering around, but due to the brutality of the men in gray, no one took action for the time being. There are so many hostages. If they were to rescue them, wouldn't there be countless casualties? Yang Yi pondered. The felons from Island X, those people will definitely not be released. It can only depend on the police and these people to see who will win. But Yang Yi remembered that in his previous life he heard about an attack on a certain opera house in this city. Even if the attacker was killed, in the chaos, hundreds of hostages were killed. Yang Yi thought about it. No matter what, he could not let Murphy and the children out. But at this moment, suddenly a burst of fierce gunshots echoed in the large space of the station. Yang Yi was startled and withdrew his thoughts. Sure enough, the men in gray were impatient with those righteous people. They directly picked up the automatic rifle in their arms and fired at the ceiling. There was another burst of screaming and crying in the station, but fortunately, Yang Yi saw that those people were just scared to the ground. The man in gray who fired the gun did not shoot at them. However, this barrage of gunfire made the gray-robed men even more arrogant, and they all laughed out loud. These men in gray were still organized. Someone shouted a few times from upstairs, and their laughter calmed down. Yang Yi could understand what they were saying. Yang Yi could basically understand the Semitic language. But then the station's broadcast suddenly rang. This time, the person who spoke was in English, and the message was to warn the hostages to obediently lie on the ground and listen to their orders. But Yang Yi could still hear that this person's tone was very calm, and he had the demeanor of a commander. Did the important person of these people go to the station's control center? Yang Yi thought to himself, and a pair of malicious eyes appeared in his mind. He should be there too, right? Could it be the person who spoke just now? Yang Yi was not interested in exploring this question. He held his phone and continued to pay attention to the leaked negotiations on the media. As long as I don't go near the toilet, how you fight has nothing to do with me, Yang Yi thought to himself. But even if Yang Yi wanted to stay out of it, others wanted to rub the fur on his lion's head. All of a sudden, two men in gray walked towards him with guns in their hands. They were talking to each other as they walked towards him. Damn you. Chapter 1278. At this moment, in the air duct of the women's toilet, Mo Fei was cautiously poking her head out and looking outside through the circular fence. But it was empty below, and there was no movement at all. This made Murphy even more anxious. However, compared to the silent Murphy, Tong Tong was completely oblivious to what was happening outside. The little guy thought that he was participating in an interesting game. Tong Tong kept moving his little, but between his mother and big sister. Then he blinked his big round eyes and looked at his big sister, secretly laughing to himself. You can't laugh. She could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't know what was going on. She only knew that the little girl's heart was filled with sadness. Now that Tong Tong was laughing, she remembered her father's advice and whispered to Tong Tong. In front of her, Mo Fei finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She pressed the Buddha statue hanging on her neck up and down. The head of the Buddha statue drilled into the big belly, but this way, they could still talk. Mo Fei whispered, "Hello, how's it going over there?" She spoke very softly, as though she was afraid that her voice would be heard. However, there was no response from the earpiece, so Murphy started to panic. No, nothing must have happened. Maybe the earpiece is broken. Yes, it must be because the weather in Sweden is too cold. Murphy muttered to herself as she tried to find an excuse. But Mo Fei's eyes couldn't help but turn red. There were tears rolling down her cheeks, but she was biting her lower lip tightly. However, at this moment, there was a sound coming from the earpiece. It wasn't Yang Yi's voice. Instead, it was 3 slow and light knocks. What was that? Murphy was dumbfounded. Actually, she heard Yang Yi talking about it, but it was too urgent. Yang Yi only talked to Shi and forgot to tell Murphy the secret signal. As a result, Mo Fei's mind was now blank. She couldn't remember that she had heard the conversation between Yang Yi and Cici on the pipeline just now. Fortunately, Yang Yi's reply was sent out at the same time, so she could hear it. The little girl was stunned for a moment before she whispered, Papa said that he can't talk until later." Really? There was a rustling sound. Murphy turned around with difficulty and looked at her daughter. Her eyes were filled with hope as she whispered, "Really? Papa said 3 times, and then he will talk to us later." Cici seriously raised 3 slender white fingers and said to her mother. Murphy breathed a sigh of relief, but soon she felt that Yang Yi should be in trouble, so he didn't respond in time. Therefore, Murphy's heart was in her mouth again. She quickly shushed Shi and signaled her not to talk. Tong Tong was caught in the middle. She looked left and right with a blank face. Yes, Yang Yi was preparing to attack the 2 men in gray who were coming over. He had already pulled out his army knife, high-heeled shoes from his waist. However, just as he leaned out of the potted plant, Murphy's voice suddenly came from his headset. He was worried that Murphy would get into an accident if he didn't respond, so he had to go back first. He took out his mobile phone and made a simple secret signal. Then he plugged his mobile phone and turned off the sound of his headset. His eyes became sharp again. But before he started the car again, Yang Yi's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the surveillance camera that the 2 men in gray had just passed by. His mind spun quickly, and in the end, he chose to put the heels of his high heels back on his waist. Yang Yi's figure silently appeared from behind the potted plant. He quietly approached along the edge of the potted plant where the surveillance camera couldn't capture him. It was as if he had returned to the bloody world. The survival skills that Yang Yi had imprinted in his soul bloomed again. Moreover, although he was used to living a comfortable life, he had never relaxed his self-cultivation. With his perfect physical fitness, Yang Yi felt that he could move stealthily more smoothly than in his previous life. He was like a ghost, hiding in the air. Even though he had already walked behind the two men, they still didn't notice him and were still talking. Yang Yi could understand the Semitic language. From their conversation, Yang Yi knew that although they were already men of sacrifice, they had not completely become killing machines that could be controlled by others. They still had their own emotions. They were angrily talking about their loved ones who had died in the war. They compared the number of white people that they had shot to death, venting their inner hatred without restraint. Yang Yi had already snuck up behind them. He could even avoid the lights that might give him away because of his shadow. Perhaps you have hatred in your hearts, but I'm sorry, I won't allow you to vent your hatred here. Yang Yi thought to himself as he listened to their words. At the same time, Yang Yi's two open hands flashed out like a fox's shadow, causing the air to fluctuate. The two gray-clothed men seemed to have sensed something, but they only raised their eyelids before suddenly twisting their heads. Muffled cracking sounds rang out at the same time. The vigor that represented vitality gradually faded from their eyes, and the gloominess of death quietly covered them. Yang Yi's palms were still covering their mouths. His strong arms supported the two heavy bodies that were powerlessly sliding down. Although he had killed 2 lives, Yang Yi's expression was calm. He was neither happy nor sad, let alone excited. These people, other than using guns to attack civilians, were actually just ordinary people. Yang Yi could fight all of them alone with his bare hands. Wasn't it just killing 2 small fries? What was there to be excited about? For the time being, the crisis was resolved. Yang Yi first moved the 2 guys into the men's toilet and carefully put them down. Because they had directly twisted their cervical vertebrae, causing damage to their medulla oblongata and spine, Yang Yi did not leave any traces behind. Now, when he dealt with the 2 bodies, he had to be careful not to leave any traces of himself. For example, he had to erase any fingerprints that he might have left behind. His computer-like brain started working again. Now, it seems that the possibility of successfully avoiding danger with Murphy and the children is higher. Then, I can consider the next problem. Yang Yi searched the bodies of the 2 dead men while pondering. How can I separate myself from Murphy and the children? Yang Yi really did not want to be a hero. Even if it was just letting the police know that he had killed 2 KBFC members, it would not do. Once the media publicized it, he would become a thorn in the side of these lunatics. Yang Yi didn't want these people to target him or his family. While he was still thinking about it, he had an unexpected gain from looting the bodies. In addition to 2 rifles and some magazines, Yang Yi also found a Gurkha scimitar with a leather sheath on the waist of one of the dead men. There is such a good item? Yang Yi was delighted. Actually, he did not like to use this kind of scimitar. Although it was very mechanical, it had a big curve. He preferred the tang knife, which was straight and sharp. Of course, the tang knife was a little long, so it was more convenient to use it for assassination. But, at this time, it was good enough that he had a knife to use. How could he be so calculative? Yang Yi pulled out the scimitar and looked at the blade. After confirming that there was no mistake, he put it back into the sheath and placed it on his waist. Then he took off one of the communication headphones and put it on himself. There were also gloves. Yang Yi wanted to make sure that he did not leave any traces behind. Naturally, there were 2 automatic rifles. Yang Yi brought one along and stuffed 2 magazines into his trouser pocket. After walking out from the men's washroom, Yang Yi was in no hurry to do anything else. He dashed back into the women's washroom. On one hand, he wanted to put back the broken crystal high heels. If he had known it would not be useful, he would not have broken it. On the other hand, he wanted to inform Murphy and the children that he was safe. When the door to the women's washroom was opened, Murphy heard the movement. She immediately became nervous. Her face turned pale, and she was at a loss as to what to do. Thankfully, Yang Yi's gentle voice made her feel safe. "It is me." Murphy's tense heart finally relaxed somewhat. Her body slumped down and tears silently flowed out from her eyes. Chapter 1279. Yang Yi unscrewed the screw and opened the baffle of the air vent. When he saw Murphy hiding inside, his heart ached. He took out a tissue from his pocket and wiped the tears from Murphy's eyes. He pretended to be relaxed and said, "It's okay. Don't worry, I'm fine." In fact, Yang Yi was relieved because he found that the opponents were not strong. They were just ordinary people who only knew how to use guns and bombs to bully ordinary people. After killing the two men in gray, Yang Yi got their communication devices and could know their movements at any time. It could be said that the toilet was safe for the time being. Therefore, Yang Yi had the time to open the air vent to comfort Murphy and the children. Although her tears were flowing, Murphy didn't want Yang Yi to worry. She tried to calm herself down and said softly, "I heard the gunshots just now. I didn't know what happened to you. Thank God you're fine." "Of course I'm fine. They were just some small fish and shrimps. Your husband is powerful," Yang Yi said with a smile. "How are she and mommy?" Only then did Mo Fei realize what was going on. He hurriedly made some space so that Cici could squeeze little Momo. And the two little heads squeezed out one after another. Hee Papa. When Xiao Yujing saw Papa, he thought the game was over. He gave a clear cry and laughed with Papa in delight. "Shushu, you can't speak loudly," Yang Yi said quickly. She was sensible. The little girl looked at her father's face worriedly and said in a low voice, "Papa, I miss you so much." "Papa misses you too. It's okay. Wait patiently for a while. After we finish the game, we'll go shopping, okay?" Yang Yi comforted with a smile. Cici nodded obediently and continued to say in a low voice, "Papa, let me tell you, just now you made 3 bangs, but Mama still doesn't know. I was the one who told Mama." Yang Yi braced himself and listened to his daughter patiently. He knew that at this time, she also needed to express her uneasiness. It was not good to hold it in. Tong Tong was sandwiched between his sister, and his little head was pressed under his sister's chin. He blinked his eyes in confusion. Finally, the little guy who felt very uncomfortable struggled. "Big sister." Little Bayan twisted around and looked pitifully at Cici. She seemed to come back to her senses at this time. She stepped back to give her brother some space. However, she was still reluctant to leave her father. She seemed to have thought of something and said in a low voice, "Papa, I'm hungry." Seeing his daughter's pitiful appearance, Yang Yi patted his head and said with a smile, Papa is such a big idiot. I actually forgot. Wait a moment." Yang Yi opened the partition of the bathroom and went to the next cubicle. He opened his carry-on bag and took out some chocolates, biscuits and other snacks. After all, he was traveling with a child, so he must eat a lot. Yang Yi was also brave. At this critical moment, he calmly took out little Momo's milk bottle and used the hot water in the kettle, which was installed on the train, to fill the bottle with milk for the little guy. Of course, it didn't take too much time. Yang Yi's movements were very swift. When Yang Yi climbed up again, he had already handed a small bag of food, a bottle of milk, and a bottle of mineral water to Tong Tong like a hotel waiter. Take a look at this milk. If it gets cold, you can give it to your brother. Hua, you have to share some with your sister. In times of trouble, we have to help each other in order to overcome the difficulties together. Understand? Yang Yi didn't care whether Hua could understand or not, so he gave a few words of advice. However, after having food, Shi and Tong Tong's emotions were soothed. Murphy also relaxed a little because of Yang Yi's calm and collected performance. After rescrewing the lid, Yang Yi walked out of the women's bathroom. His gentle eyes became sharp again. Yang Yi sneaked back to the potted plant. He first observed the situation in the waiting hall of the station. There wasn't much change. The hostages were still lying on the ground, and the surrounding area was guarded by armed men in gray. Then, Yang Yi took out his phone and looked at the news on the internet. According to the news, as Yang Yi had expected, the negotiations had reached a stalemate. The hijackers were still clamoring that if they didn't get a satisfactory answer, they would start killing one hostage every 10 minutes in half an hour. Time. I have about 15 to 20 minutes left. Yang Yi looked at his watch and calculated in his mind. According to the police's habit, they would take action at the most critical moment. In other words, Yang Yi only had about 15 minutes left to do what he wanted to do. 15 minutes is enough. Yang Yi got up quietly. Like a ghost, he silently avoided the surveillance cameras and passed through the staff passageway. Then he avoided a man in gray who was patrolling the staircase and climbed up to the third floor like a gecko. Yang Yi wanted to do two things. First, he wanted to go to the surveillance room and destroy all the surveillance video records. After all, even though he had avoided the surveillance camera, the two men in gray that he had killed had swaggered past the surveillance camera. Yang Yi didn't know if these people had cut off the surveillance signal, but he couldn't take the risk. He had to clear himself of suspicion. Of course, the second thing was also for the same purpose. After he cut off the surveillance signal, he wanted to move the two men in gray from the men's bathroom to another place, so that others wouldn't think of him as a hero. However, just as Yang Yi was about to go to the surveillance room, he heard an angry shout from the intercepted headset, which made his heart sink. It was the leader's command, but it was different from the calm command he had given at the beginning. It seemed that the failure of the negotiation had made him angry. But what really made Yang Yi uneasy was the content of his command. Yang Yi, who could completely understand their language, could clearly hear the leader asking the people downstairs to send people up to move the big guy down and stick it on the pillar in the waiting hall. If the arrogant politicians didn't agree with his request, and if the military and police dared to rush in, he would send the entire station to the sky and let everyone be buried with them. F***ck. There really are explosives. Yang Yi's heart was pounding like a herd of alpacas. He clenched his teeth and clenched his fists. If they really did move the big guy down, there would be a conflict during the final battle. And then the station would be detonated. Yang Yi didn't think that he, Murphy, and the children who were hiding in the toilet would be able to escape this disaster. When the nest is overturned, there will be no eggs left intact. But just as Yang Yi was cursing in his heart, he raised his eyebrows slightly and turned his gaze to a big room with the sign surveillance room. He was indeed looking for this room at the beginning, but Yang Yi found this room not because he saw the sign on the door, but because his sharp ears heard the movements in the room. Although the leader's shout came from his headset, Yang Yi's other ear, which was wearing his own headset, could also hear the exact same sound from the crack in the door of this room. These people, weren't they negotiating with the officials at the control center? Why would they be here? Of course, Yang Yi quickly thought of the key point. The control center of the train station was usually set up on the top floor, which was easier to break into. In comparison, the surveillance room could see all the positions inside the train station through the surveillance camera, and it was also safer and more secretive. So, these people set up the command center here. I searched high and low for it, only to find it by chance. Yang Yi thought to himself. But he was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he silently crept over, and when no one was paying attention, he slowly adjusted the camera that was aimed at the door of the surveillance room. In order not to attract the attention of the people in the surveillance room, Yang Yi did not move too far, only making sure that the camera could not see him. Then he stuck close to the wall, like a shadow, and crept along the blind spot of the camera. Just like before, without making a sound, he twisted the neck of the man in gray who was guarding the door. Really too weak. Yang Yi felt that this group of people, other than their courage to face death unflinchingly, could not even compare to some of the special forces in the country. They had no sense of danger at all. Yang Yi used his body to support the collapsed body of the guard, and put him down along the wall. There was no time to hide in a hidden place, because after the leader finished shouting, there were already people downstairs calling for help, preparing to go upstairs. Going upstairs 1 2 3 3 people. Yang Yi counted the names. Then he leaned against the door of the monitoring room and closed his eyes. He listened carefully and counted in his heart. 1 2 3 4. For breathing sounds. It was less than he had imagined. Chapter 1280. In the monitoring room, the leader of the gray-clothed men was shouting angrily into the phone. When he was agitated, he even waved one of his arms. Beside him, one person was using a small computer that he carried with him to pay close attention to the movements of the media. Another person was closely watching the surveillance cameras on the wall. He was paying close attention to some of the surveillance cameras that might have been broken in. In addition to these three people, there was also a man in gray who was in charge of combat. When the knocking sound came, He was sitting near the door with a rifle in his hands. When he heard the knocking sound, he grabbed the rifle tightly and stood up vigilantly. "Who is it?" he asked in a deep voice. "Take the big guy. Didn't XXX say so?" A familiar Semitic voice came in, although the voice sounded a little impatient. The man in gray was still relieved. At the same time, the leader who was on the phone put the microphone in front of him and waved for the man to open the door. He looked impatient, as if he was worried that their conversation would interfere with his negotiation. The man in gray who was on guard did not dare to be negligent. He quickly freed one hand to open the door. When he saw the man in the gray windbreaker, he further relaxed his vigilance. However, when the man in gray in front of him raised his head and revealed a face that was completely different from theirs, the man in gray who was in charge of security suddenly realized that something was wrong. However, he only had time to widen his eyes. The light in his brown pupils froze in an instant, and he could no longer speak. Yang Yi's sharp eyes pierced through the man's shoulders that suddenly drooped. He looked at the leader who was still busy negotiating and the technicians on both sides who were focused on the screen. That's right. Yang Yi had disguised himself as the gray-clothed man. He had put on the gray-clothed man's windbreaker, and even put on the man's hood. The dagger he had used to stab the gray-clothed man's chin at lightning speed into his brain stem, and medulla oblongata, had all been found on the gray-clothed man outside the door. After calmly getting rid of the first man in gray, Yang Yi's left hand was like an iron clamp tightly holding the man's arm. He held the man's body firmly and blocked the view of the people inside. Yang Yi's right hand slowly let go of the handle of the dagger. He gently reached for his waist and pulled out the sharp machete. 2 drops of blood fell. One dripped on Yang Yi's windbreaker, and the other dripped silently on the ground. In the monitoring room, the other 3 people didn't notice. The leader who was on the phone even waved at Yang Yi, indicating that he should wait there until he finished the call. However, Yang Yi already recognized the leader who was on the phone. It was the man with the pair of malicious eyes that he couldn't forget. Perhaps the negotiation was met with a strong rebuttal again. His eyes were filled with hatred, madness, and viciousness. "There's no need to wait for half an hour. I'll let you see the consequences of angering me." The leader slammed the phone down in exasperation. He cursed and shouted in the control room. "Pick 10 hostages for me and drag them out." Perhaps he was too angry, but he forgot to give orders over the radio. However, the leader didn't care. He reached out and pressed a microphone on the control panel. Their people had connected it from the control room. It could broadcast directly to the entire station. The leader, who was almost crazy, attracted the attention of his 2 assistants. They couldn't help but turn to look at their boss. At this moment, Yang Yi knew that his chance had come. XXX, listen to my orders now. The broadcast in the station could be clearly heard in the monitoring room. The leader, who was spitting into the microphone with bloodshot eyes, didn't notice that the heads of the 2 assistants behind him had been twisted at a strange angle, and they silently fell into their chairs. "Catch 10 people, no 20. The broadcast stopped abruptly, and there was no more sound, leaving only a puzzling silence. Of course, the passengers and hostages in the station were scared out of their wits. They were lying on the ground shivering. However, without any further orders, the guards in gray didn't know where to start. Catch people? What for? How would they know? The leader that they worshipped had his neck slit and was lying in a pool of blood in the monitoring room. Yang Yi didn't make any unnecessary movements. He neatly approached the leader and covered his mouth. With a swipe of his scimitar, the world became peaceful again. So talkative. Yang Yi coldly glanced at the eyes of the KBFC leader, who had once made him fearful, and thought to himself, "I thought you were strong. Turns out you are just a piece of trash." However, after getting rid of the 4 people in the monitoring room, Yang Yi didn't have time to be happy. He moved the body of the guard outside the door into the room and closed the door. There were 3 people in gray going up the stairs. Although Yang Yi had enough time to escape, he didn't have enough time to destroy all the surveillance footage. Therefore, Yang Yi decided to go all out and ambush the next 3 people. Of course, Yang Yi didn't try to be brave. He was able to assassinate the 4 people in the monitoring room without using a gun. That was because he was playing a psychological game. He hit the other party when they were unprepared. Moreover, among the 4 people, 2 of them were technicians. They didn't have any fighting power. However, Yang Yi didn't think that he could rely on a scimitar to get rid of 3 armed militants. Therefore, Yang Yi also picked up a gun this time. Fortunately, he found a gun with a silencer on the control panel. The experienced Yang Yi didn't just wear gloves while holding the gun. He also used someone's scarf to wrap his wrist and the windbreaker that he had stolen. As Yang Yi had expected, although Yang Yi had imitated the leader's voice and made the other party lower their guard, the moment the door of the monitoring room opened, the smell of blood that escaped made the leader in gray open his eyes. However, by the time he realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. Yang Yi, who was pretending to be a guard behind the door, raised his hand at lightning speed. Yang Yi pointed the first 2 shots at the 2 men in gray standing behind him, who were still in a daze. The bullets drilled into their foreheads. The leader in gray was exactly what Yang Yi had thought. He panicked and made a dodging action. If Yang Yi had fired at him, he might not have hit the vital parts. However, Yang Yi had already calculated everything. When the other party hurriedly squatted down to dodge, he put away the gun with his right arm and held the Gurkha scimitar with his left hand. He leaned forward and swung. In terms of shooting, Yang Yi didn't dare to say that he was very good. However, in terms of knife skills, Yang Yi didn't believe that there were many people in the world who were better than him. Therefore, under the silver light that was as beautiful as the moonlight, the leader of the gray-clothed men was not spared either. He dropped his gun and covered his bleeding neck. With 2 whimpers, he fell to the ground with a loud thud. Scum! Yang Yi sighed faintly. There was even a hint of resentment. 15 minutes later, a media reporter waved his phone in ecstasy and rushed to the military police headquarters that was setting up an inescapable trap. Another 5 minutes later, the special military police, who were ready, attacked the Paris train station that KBFZ had occupied for more than an hour. Smoke bombs and flash bombs kept exploding. The intense gunfire could be heard clearly from the reporter's area far away. An hour later, on the TV, the host reported sorrowfully, "It has finally come to an end." According to incomplete statistics, more than 60 station staff and tourists were unfortunately killed at the scene, and more than 100 people were injured. During the police's siege, 6 police officers were unfortunately hit by stray bullets and died in the line of duty. In addition, more than 10 military police officers were injured and are currently undergoing emergency rescue. However, just as the host and an expert were fiercely discussing whether it was appropriate for the police to give up on negotiations and choose to attack the station directly, their TV station received an unconfirmed piece of news. The host excitedly reported again, "We received news that the police found XXX equivalent explosives in the station. Fortunately, these explosives weren't equipped with detonators and weren't detonated. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable." Regardless, this successful rescue operation made people who were paying attention to this incident heave a sigh of relief. They started to light candles on social media and pray for the injured tourists and police officers. At this moment, in the train station, where the smoke had yet to disperse, Yang Yi and Murphy, who had just come out of the toilet, were sitting in the ambulance driven by the paramedics. His and Murphy's clothes were dusty, their hair was messy, and they looked like they were still in shock. Shishi and Tong Tong were in their father's arms, and their heads were covered by their father's big hands. They could not see anything except for the sirens in their ears. Shishi was still very obedient. She vaguely sensed that something was wrong. The scared little girl just wanted to hug her father and bury her head in his thick chest. Only in this way could she feel a little safe. Tong Tong, on the other hand, was very mischievous. The little fellow had no idea what he had just experienced. When he heard the ambulance siren, he could not help but twist around in his father's arms. Unfortunately, he could not break free from his father's large hands. MMM. Delicate car, MMM, I want to see a delicate car. The little guy, who was covered in his father's stomach, began to muffled cries. Chapter 1281. Yang Yi's family, as well as the other hostages who had been rescued, were escorted by the police into the ambulance. They left the train station, which was a mess and looked as cruel as a battlefield. When the ambulance drove out of the gloomy train station and passed through the gate, it was as if they had entered another world. Through the window of the ambulance, if they did not look at the police cars, reporters, or the helicopters hovering in the sky, they would realize that the morning sun in Paris was bright and beautiful. It gave people a sense of warmth and hope in the cold winter. There were several hospitals that had taken in the hostages. The hospital that Yang Yi and his family went to was also very chaotic. Injured hostages were sent in from time to time, and there was not even a quiet ward available. However, Yang Yi's family could temporarily rest in the restaurant that was guarded by the police after the doctor checked that there were no injuries. They couldn't leave for the time being because the police would come over later to take their statements and do a background check. This was normal, as after such a big incident, every country would conduct a background check to ensure that KBFZ did not take advantage of the chaos to slip away. Moreover, it was fortunate that Yang Yi and his family were East Asians. If they had been Middle Easterners, they would have been interrogated on the spot. Although his luggage and communication equipment had undergone a preliminary inspection before he left, they had not been taken away. Therefore, after some thought, Yang Yi decided to call back to China and ask Guizi's father to help pass a message to the embassy. After putting away his phone, Yang Yi returned to the dining table. Xi and Tong Tong were drinking milk and eating croissants for breakfast. I want it, I want it. Tong Tong pointed at the croissant in his sister's hand. When he saw the butter filling in his sister's bread, he waved his hands and shouted excitedly, "You have it too. You can eat it inside." Xi pointed at the croissant in her brother's hand and shouted. The little girl's tone was raised by her brother. The croissant was very heavy, and Tong Tong could only grab a corner of it. It was a little difficult for him to chew on it with his small mouth. In fact, the breakfast in France was quite ordinary. It was not as varied as Chinese food. However, such a big loaf of bread was something new to the two children, so Xi and Tong Tong ate it with relish. Tong Tong lowered his head and looked at the mountain of bread in his hand. He shook his head unwillingly. He used his trump card on his sister, his pitiful eyes and expression. His mouth was slightly open as if he was anticipating something. Xi had no choice but to reach out her hand and pass the croissant to her brother. She was still chewing on the bread as she said vaguely, "Then I'll let you have a bite." Tong Tong immediately beamed with joy. He held his sister's hand between his two small wrists and pressed it down. Then he lowered his head and bit into the croissant. When he raised his head, not only was his mouth full, but there was also a bit of butter on the tip of his nose. Xi was amused by this scene and laughed happily. Although the little girl noticed that something was wrong at the train station and was worried about her father's safety, she was only a 7-year-old girl after all. She did not have such complicated thoughts. When she saw that her father had returned safely, she left the train station without being exposed to the tragic situation. Naturally, she forgot about the unpleasant things and played with Tong Tong. Tong Tong and his sister looked at each other and smiled. He did not notice the butter on his nose. He excitedly held out the bread in his hand and said in a childish voice, "Sister, eat, eat." I don't want it. Your saliva is on it." Xi teased him on purpose. "Oh, I can't." Tong Tong did not comply and continued to hold out his hand. He only withdrew his hand after his sister shared the bread with him. However, compared to the carefree children, Murphy was greatly affected. After all, she knew that something big had happened. Moreover, when she left, she saw the bloodstains on the ground. This scene would probably bring nightmares to the simple-minded Murphy. Therefore, Yang Yi saw that Murphy had lost her appetite. She only drank some milk and gently held the cup while looking at the children in a daze. Yang Yi simply moved the chair over and reached out to hug Murphy's slender body. He gently kissed Murphy's forehead and said softly, "It's okay." Mo Fei snuggled against Yang Yi's broad chest. There were thousands of words in her heart that she wanted to say, but when the words came to her mouth, she found that she couldn't say anything. She just felt as if she hadn't slept for several days and nights. She was very tired. She just wanted to stay in Yang Yi's safe and warm arms, avoiding the wind and rain while having a quiet rest. However, when she closed her eyes, Murphy was a little frightened and could not help but shed a few tears. She sniffled and whispered in front of Yang Yi, "Hubby, I'm scared." Yang Yi could only hold Murphy in his arms so that she could feel safer. He even softly coaxed her. It's okay, it's okay. Isn't it all in the past? Let's wait for a while. We won't buy any clothes. Let's book the fastest flight and go home, okay?" Murphy weakly nodded and whispered in agreement. Okay, we won't buy clothes. She just wanted to follow Yang Yi and take the children back to their familiar and safe hometown. Cece still noticed her mother's strange behavior. The little girl put the bread back on the plate and jumped down from the chair with her two small hands. She ran to her father and mother's side. "Mom, what's wrong?" She blinked her big eyes that seemed to be able to speak. She looked at her mother, who was facing her father with her back facing her, and then looked at her father and asked in a low voice, "Mom is tired. She needs to rest." Yang Yi told a white lie. Cece came to a sudden realization. However, the little girl did not comfort her mother. Instead, she ran back and sat on her chair. She actively muttered to her brother, "Mama is tired and wants to sleep. Brother, you can't speak loudly, okay?" Can't speak loudly? However, it did not matter. Tong Tong was not as talkative as his sister. He held the croissant that his sister had already bitten open and kept eating while looking at her. The Paris train station incident was a major event that shocked the world. It also attracted the attention of many countries and foreign media. The fastest and most effective response was the Chinese embassy. After the incident, they quickly sent a commissioner to the police station to find out if any Chinese citizens were injured or killed in the incident. However, soon a domestic phone call came in. Not only was the embassy alerted, but some of the mainstream Chinese media reporters who were waiting for news at the embassy also received the news that surprised them. In this major event, not only did Chinese citizens appear at the scene, but their identities were also not simple. Looking at the ambassador who rushed to the hospital in a hurry, although the reporters could not follow him, they all excitedly picked up their phones and contacted the headquarters in China. Soon, the news spread throughout the country. All major media outlets that did not have overseas resources, and online media, reposted the short message. It is reported that China's outstanding entrepreneur and entertainment star Yang Yi and Murphy's family were involved in the Paris train station robbery during their trip. They have been sent to the hospital and their condition is unknown. This news was not shocking enough. After all, it was published by the official media, so the wording was more cautious. The media that reposted the news reported the news one after another. The wording was even more alarmist, such as the biggest celebrity who appeared in the Paris train station KX, the future richest man in China, and the superstar. Many titles were given to Yang Yi and Murphy. Then, they used the tragic news of Yang Yi's family's uncertain survival to stir up the public's emotions. For a time, even though Guozi immediately used micro-broadcasting to inform the public that Yang Yi's family was safe and sound, it did not stop the public from praying for Yang Yi. It was as if Yang Yi was about to die. Everyone cried and shouted on micro-broadcasting, sending out red candles and praying for Yang Yi's safety. Chapter 1282. When the domestic media uproar just began, Yang Yi was already being interrogated by two routine police officers in the hospital's cafeteria. Because the other party's attitude was not too bad because he was yellow, and they allowed the delicate Murphy and the children to rest on the other side, Yang Yi did not insist on hiring a lawyer. We boarded the train from Leipzig, Germany last night, and arrived in Paris at 6:10 in the morning. Yang Yi answered in fluent French, which made communication much smoother than English, and left a good impression on the other party. We came to Paris for tourism and shopping. My wife and I are in the music industry in China. When the incident happened, we happened to be in the bathroom in this area. I heard gunshots, so I asked my family to hide inside. Yang Yi asked the other party to take out the diagram of the train station, pointed to the bathroom where they hid, and said frankly, "I don't know why they didn't search our bathroom. Fortunately, we were not discovered by KBFC. When I heard gunshots outside, I was already very nervous." Yang Yi spread his hands and showed a trace of fear. "But I didn't tell the children what happened. I just told them that we were playing a game of hide and seek. However, it had to be said that for such a big incident, the French police's attention level rose to a very high level. Even for an inconspicuous passenger like Yang Yi, they had already investigated a lot of information based on his passport. A police officer took out a piece of paper and asked seriously, "We found that you originally booked a train ticket from Sweden to Paris on the 12th. You should have arrived in Paris yesterday. Why did you change to the train that arrived today?" "Because Leipzig is too attractive. As I said just now, my wife and I are in the music industry in China, so when we passed by Leipzig, we wanted to go to Leipzig." Yang Yi answered calmly, "So we changed the train." The police officer wrote the statement, then picked up the paper about Yang Yi's investigation information, looked at it, and nodded. Obviously, Yang Yi's words were similar to the answer he expected. At this time, at the door of the restaurant, a group of people filed in. There were Chinese people in suits and several high-ranking police officers accompanying them. "I'm Gao Yi, the minister of the Chinese embassy in France. Are you Mr. Yang Yi?" The middle-aged man, who was not tall, but his image and temperament were very serious, extended his hand to Yang Yi. There was no need to elaborate on the small talk. With the help of the people from the embassy, Yang Yi's family could finally leave the hospital. They took the car driven by the embassy and returned to the headquarters of the Chinese embassy in District 7 in France. The minister, Gao Yi, was the second in command in the embassy. However, he was also very busy and did not have time to chat with Yang Yi. After sending Yang Yi to the embassy, he received a notice that there were casualties of Chinese citizens in the disaster. He excused himself and hurriedly brought others to the hospital for a visit. Yang Yi, Murphy, and the children sat in the conference room inside the embassy. A staff member helped to entertain them. "We are finally safe. At least we can hear the familiar Mandarin." Yang Yi patted Mo Fei, who was still a little nervous, stretched his body, and said with a smile. He wanted to use positive emotions to get Murphy out of her fear as soon as possible. The effect was not bad. Seeing Yang Yi smiling so relaxedly, Murphy was also relieved. She smiled gently at Yang Yi, took a sip of hot water, and whispered thank you to the girl. The appearance of Yang Yi and Murphy still caused quite a stir inside the embassy. After all, these two people were famous. Even if many diplomats rarely cared about the domestic entertainment industry, Yang Yi and Murphy still made many diplomats remember them because they were in the limelight in the United States and sang a lot of English songs. Some of the younger staff members in the business department or the science department couldn't hold back their curiosity. They came to the conference room to see Yang Yi and Murphy under the pretense of concern, and shyly took out a small notebook for Yang Yi and Murphy to sign. There were even some girls who liked Shishi very much. Seeing the delicate little girl sitting on the side and taking care of her brother, they couldn't help but ask to take a photo with Shishi as a souvenir. Hee no. The little girl mischievously turned her head and jumped down from the chair. It wasn't that Shishi was shy, nor was it that she was throwing a tantrum. The little girl ran to her father's side, pressed her hands on her father's thigh, and jumped up and down. Only then did she look back at the big sister and shyly smiled. Hee, I have to let Papa tie up my hair before I can take a photo. Oh, this little girl is getting more and more shameless. However, because Shishi's hair was messy after climbing the pipe, and she didn't have a chance to take a shower yet. When Yang Yi wiped the little girl's face, he also used a hot towel to wipe the dust on Shishi's hair. So after he untied Shishi's hair tie, Yang Yi didn't have time to tie up Shishi's hair. The laughter in the conference room diluted some of the sadness and tension. Murphy also looked much calmer. She also sat beside Yang Yi, reached out to touch Shishi's head, and smiled softly. Inside the embassy, especially in the office area at the back, signal control was actually implemented. Sitting in the office, Yang Yi didn't even know that his mobile phone signal was blocked. It wasn't until Lans Hao Kai couldn't wait and directly called the embassy to ask about Yang Yi's news that the staff transferred the signal through the landline that Yang Yi and Lans Hao Kai talked on the phone. Are you really okay? You're fine after returning to the embassy? That's God's blessing. When we saw the news, we were scared to death. Lans Hao Kai said with emotion. Xionair's mother was so worried that she cried. Although Xiaogui said that you were fine, we were still very worried. When Yang Yi heard this, his heart felt warm. Just as he was about to say something, a loud voice suddenly interrupted them. I was also very worried. Papa Yang Yi, you've been away for so long. Why haven't you come back yet? Lan Xian shouted. I've already come back from my grandpa's place. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment, and couldn't help but smile. This little fat girl didn't seem to realize the seriousness of the matter. However, the little girl's concern made Yang Yi feel very gratified. When he went back, he would give this little girl an extra drumstick. It's okay, Xian. We'll be back soon. Don't worry, Yang Yi said softly. Xian? Shi, who was next to him, heard her father call her when he was on the phone, and suddenly became excited. She quickly ran over and asked excitedly, Papa, is that Xian? I want to talk to Xian. Therefore, the phone was occupied by these two little girls. After leaving Sweden, Shi, who hadn't talked to Lan Xian, excitedly chatted with Lan Xian on the phone. Xian, let me tell you, we were very strange today. My brother, Mom, and I all went to the sky. Not the sky, but the building. Well, and I played the piano yesterday. A lot of people saw me. It's okay here, but I ate delicious bread in the morning. I haven't taken a picture yet. I forgot to take a picture. Yang Yi asked the embassy's technical staff to help remove the signal limitation on his mobile phone. Suddenly, a lot of missed calls and text messages flooded in. So many? Yang Yi was a little surprised, but also a little touched when he looked at the familiar names in the missed calls and text messages, as well as the worried greetings. Ding Xiang, Guizi, Mo Xiaowan, Lu Xiaoshu Miao Chuan, Diyuanlei, Jujie, Lu Benji, Fujun Mao Pei Fu Chen Fengchen, and so on. Even Hu Songnan from Harbor City, Lin Mu and Chen Yijie, and those star friends who had filmed shows and movies with him. It turned out that there were so many people who cared about them. Yang Yi, who was a little unsociable, was a little touched. Chapter 1283. When natural and man-made disasters happened in other countries, ordinary people in the country might not gloat, but they would just watch calmly. They would rarely be as compassionate as they were when they prayed for blessings on micro-broadcasting, and worried about those who were not related by blood. However, after the news of Yang Yi and his family being involved in the KX at the Paris train station broke out, the news really touched the hearts of many people. Regardless of whether they were fans of Yang Yi and Murphy, many netizens were worried about Yang Yi, Murphy, and their two children who were very famous and liked by netizens. After all, Yang Yi and Murphy's image was still very positive. They didn't have any scandals and didn't cause trouble all day long. This kind of low-key, serious, family-oriented, and responsible star was still very popular. Jia Siyuan was like this. She and her husband were both die-hard fans of Mo Fei, but after they had babies, they were all so busy because of the babies that they didn't have time to pay attention to the news of the entertainment industry. They only occasionally paid attention to whether Mo Fei had released a new album, and bought one to show their support. But this afternoon, when she was at work, she found out from her colleagues that Yang Yi and Murphy were in danger. Jia Siyuan, who had become sentimental after giving birth, panicked and shed tears. Scenes of her attending Murphy's fan meeting after her pregnancy flashed through her mind. She couldn't believe that the conservative and serious Murphy, and the gentle and talented Yang Yi behind her, would be killed in this big event that shocked the world. Jia Siyuan's crying scared the colleague who passed the news to her. The little sister panicked and pulled out a tissue for Jia Siyuan and quickly explained. Sister Siyuan, why are you crying? No, they're not dead yet. No, we don't know what the current situation is. The news said that they went to the hospital. Maybe it's just a small problem. It's not a big deal, right? This explanation made Jia Siyuan feel better. She calmed down and regained her rationality. She took out her phone to watch the news and complained to her colleague. You scared me to death. I thought something really happened to them. It didn't matter if he was injured or not, as long as he was still alive. Of course, Jia Siyuan didn't want them to get hurt. He was absent-minded the whole afternoon at work. He secretly took out his phone and kept checking the news and micro-broadcasting to see how things were going. As time went by, some of Yang Yi and Murphy's close friends, such as Guozi, Yang Yi, and Luo Xian, who Jia Siyuan followed, started to speak up for Yang Yi on microbroadcasting. They said that they had contacted Yang Yi and confirmed that they were all safe and sound. These microbroadcasts allowed Jia Siyuan's heart to relax by a large margin. In the end, what made her smile was that not long after, Yang Yi released a short video through his own microbroadcast, which completely dispelled the rumors that something had happened to them. At the beginning, Yang Yi swept the camera to Murphy and the two kids, who were playing with the kids in the conference room. He told the netizens that they had successfully arrived at the embassy and said that they were safe and sound. It's a blessing in disguise. Unfortunately, we happened to run into the chaos at the train station in Paris. Fortunately, when it happened, we just happened to hide in a remote women's washroom. Perhaps because the train station was too big, those people didn't search one by one, so we escaped. I just hope that everyone can forget about me hiding in the women's washroom. I hope that it won't be the biggest stain in my life. Yang Yi made a small joke to show that they weren't affected too much. Hearing this, Jia Siyuan couldn't help but laugh. She laughed so hard that tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. At the end of the video, Yang Yi still did his routine. He took Murphy to the camera and said a prayer for the civilians who were unfortunately killed and injured in this incident. Jia Siyuan forwarded this micro-broadcasting to her husband through WeChat. In this world, micro-broadcasting and WeChat were both developed by Yang Yi's company, so intercommunication was inevitable. When she put down her phone, Jia Siyuan finally showed a relaxed smile like many netizens who were relieved. The excitement in the domestic media also attracted the attention of foreign media. Some international media, such as ABC, CMM, and RTS, also paid attention. Don't underestimate the foreign media. They also quickly found out about Yang Yi's public identity. They found out that not only was Yang Yi a Chinese celebrity, a young tycoon with a net worth of several billion US dollars, they also found out that Yang Yi and Murphy were quite famous in the American entertainment industry. They also knew that they had many well-known works. In addition, Yang Yi was the creator of The Voice, as well as the boss of Facebook and the overseas version of microbroadcasting. These identities also surprised the foreign media. They couldn't help but do a special report on Yang Yi and his family. While the news channel's host was still broadcasting, he and his partner were guessing. This is probably the biggest celebrity involved in this incident. Originally, when ABC, CMM, and other television media outlets introduced an Asian person in their news reports, it didn't pique the interest of many European viewers. But not long after, ABC's resourceful news source also dug up some news about Yang Yi. They obtained exclusive authorization to broadcast a video that had just been released. A video of Yang Yi and Shishi playing the piano at Leipzig train station. Yang is not only the creator of Facebook and micro-broadcasting, he is also a musician through and through. Not only is he good at pop music, he's also proficient in classical music. He's really a godlike man. If you don't believe it, the video below will convince you. ABC's news host boasted. The video was edited. The first to be broadcasted was a clip of Yang Yi playing the crave. In the video, Yang Yi was like a virtuoso, dancing his fingers effortlessly. The passionate and beautiful melody was mesmerizing. Unbelievable, incomparably wonderful, brilliant beyond compare. The host used all the words of praise to describe Yang Yi's performance. Following that, he contacted a professor at the Leipzig Academy of Music to confirm that this piano piece had not been released yet. Only then did he tell the audience, "It's very possible that this piano piece was composed by this musician who composed songs like I'm Ours and Diamonds. This is because he has a habit of improvising his own compositions." It had to be said that hard skills were the key to convincing Westerners. Yang Yi's performance not only made ABC's host admire him so much that he couldn't help but praise him, it also attracted the attention of many viewers. Many of the European viewers were finally starting to take this unknown celebrity seriously. If you still have doubts about my judgment, then please enjoy another song. The performance may not be good enough, but the melody, please believe me, will definitely move you. The host of ABC was still talking when the screen switched to the clip of Shishi playing to Alice. The host introduced softly, "This is Yang's daughter." She was also recorded by a passerby when she was playing the piano at Leipzig railway station last night. She was also involved in this incident with her parents and brother, but fortunately, she hid in the toilet with her parents and escaped. No one was willing to pay attention to the host's words. The scene of the little girl wearing a lively pink coat and a pink headband playing the piano seriously on TV had touched the softness of many Western viewers. They couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, oh." They tilted their heads and looked at the little girl very much. Of course, the music was also very pleasant to listen to. To Alice, was a gentle melody like a lover's gentle narration. It made Shishi even more loved by everyone. Fortunately, nothing happened to her. God bless. Many of the European viewers were happy that Yang Yi's family had escaped danger. However, Yang Yi's family, who were looking forward to flying back to China as soon as possible, now encountered a little trouble. They received news from the embassy that, for the time being, all the hostages were restricted from leaving the country by the French police. As for when they would be released, this would have to wait for the results of the investigation. Although this restriction caused a lot of controversy, the French police still stubbornly carried it out. Yang Yi's family had no choice but to temporarily stay in the embassy and accept their protection. But Yang Yi had a faint feeling that this restriction was related to him. Chapter 1284. Yang Yi's guess was right. All the hostages could not leave the country for the time being. This restriction order was indeed related to him, but it was only related to what he had done at the train station. The French police were hunting down the remaining accomplices of the gray-robed man, while also searching for the mysterious person who had helped them a lot in the incident. Heroes only existed in movies. No government would like those so-called heroes who were outside the law and government management. Moreover, there was no evidence that the mysterious person who had disintegrated the KBFZ's command system had nothing to do with this batch of KBFZ. Perhaps, he was also a member of the gray-robed man? The French police had been secretly investigating, but because Yang Yi had used a stolen mobile phone to send the notice to the reporter, this secret could not be kept. The next day, someone leaked the news. Multinational media such as ABC and RTS did not hesitate to use this as a pretext to make a fuss, saying that the French police were incompetent. When there were already people helping to defuse the bomb, the attack had still caused a large number of casualties among the hostages. Of course, the French police denied it flatly. They would never admit that their military police had made a poor judgment during the attack, causing some of the KBFZ hidden among the hostages to not be killed in the first place, resulting in the heavy casualties. They have done enough to save the lives of more than 3,000 people and killed the KBFZ. They are the most trustworthy heroes of France, the police spokesman said. However, this matter had caused a lot of controversy among the French police's higher-ups. What's more, after a few days of investigation and interrogation, they couldn't find the whereabouts of the mysterious person at all. They didn't even have a clue. Their restriction order was still in effect, which had caused a lot of controversy internationally. The high-level leaders couldn't sit still anymore. We can't continue investigating. Put more energy into hunting down the KBFZ. This is what we should be doing. The voice of opposition said. Give us a little more time, or let us summon the people on the list back. I don't believe that we can't find any clues. The superintendent in charge of this matter gritted his teeth and insisted. Look at what's written on your list. XXX, American farm owner, runner-up of the 6th American farm shooting competition? And this young Chinese billionaire and superstar. You want to summon him back for interrogation? Is there something wrong with your head? He also has another identity. He served in the Chinese People's Army from XXXX to XXXX. He's a soldier, the lieutenant said without much confidence. And then, just because he was a soldier, he was suspicious? Why would a billionaire take such a huge risk to help us get rid of KBFZ? The opposing high-ranking official shook his head and revealed a sarcastic smile. You still want to summon him? Do you want the Chinese ambassador to France to sit in front of us today and question our approach? Or do you wish to face his legal team? Then there are other suspects. However, the governor ignored him and turned to look at the person sitting in the middle. Minister, I think we should stop here. Our target should be the KBFC, not the so-called hero. Who knows, he might be an insider and was killed in the conflict. We need evidence. The lieutenant could not help but shout. But we also seek the safety of the people and the dignity of the Paris police. The governor looked at the minister and said seriously, "We're already very passive in the media. Minister, even if we need to establish a hero, it should be our special police. Let the people rest assured for next year's budget." The minister sitting in the middle looked a little moved. Leaving aside the internal affairs of the French police, Yang Yi and his family were ordered to stay in Paris. They had no choice but to continue staying in the embassy and miss the opportunity to go home for the new year. On New Year's Eve, after Yang Yi and Murphy reported to their families that they were safe, they went to the Chinese embassy in France to celebrate the new year with the embassy's diplomats, the Chinese students who were invited by the embassy, and a few Chinese tourists who were lucky enough to escape the Paris train station incident, but could not return to China. Time in Paris was 6 hours slower than in China. Therefore, early in the morning, Yang Yi's family and the embassy's diplomats recorded a New Year's greeting video and sent it to Central TV's Spring Festival Gala production team. Then they stuck up Spring Festival couplets and made dumplings with their compatriots who arrived one after another. The New Year's Eve dinner was brought forward to noon, but the atmosphere was very lively. In a foreign country, it was a very happy thing to be able to celebrate the new year with compatriots who had the same skin color and the same language. What's more, there were two big stars among them this time. This made the Chinese students who were still chasing stars very excited. The ambassador even said with a smile, "When the Spring Festival Gala ends tonight, we will have a small party ourselves. Who knows, it might be even more exciting." Of course, Brother Yang and Sister Murphy each sing a song, and then a duet. Then, our cutest Shishi will play a piano piece. Won't 4 wonderful performances come out? Xiao Kai, who received Yang Yi and his family at that time, teased them with a smile. She reached out and hugged Shishi, who was currently the most popular and favorite girl in the embassy, and rubbed Shishi's cute little face. When Shishi heard Sister Kai say that she was going to play the piano, she smiled shyly, twisted her shoulders and slipped out. She even shouted mischievously, "Hee no." Shishi was already very familiar with the embassy. She was chased by a few Chinese students and ran 2 rounds before she came back. However, when the young lady came back, she discovered something new. Those stern uncles were gone, but there were still a lot of people around the table next to her father. He was teaching the Chinese students how to make dumplings. Murphy also stood there with Tong Tong in her arms and smiled as she watched Yang Yi make dumplings. Mo Fei had become much quieter in the past few days. Fortunately, Yang Yi had been by her side all the time. Otherwise, after seeing those bloody scenes, she might have closed her heart and become cold again. Today, because of the strong New Year spirit, everyone was in the banquet hall chatting and laughing as they made dumplings. There were also many fans who plucked up the courage to ask her for advice. Murphy's mood became much better. However, Tong Tong was not like his mother who liked to stay in one place without moving. He was already a little impatient in his mother's arms. At this moment, when he heard his sister's movements, he struggled to get down. "Then, Shishi, you have to look after your little brother." Murphy had no choice but to put Tong Tong down and remind Shishi. She was a little worried. Although she was still standing next to Yang Yi, her eyes were still following the 2 little guys. There were too many people around their father, so Shishi could not get a word in. She could only hold her little brother's hand and continue to wander around the banquet hall. At this moment, Xiao Kai's older sister called out from a nearby table, "Shishi, come over. Let's make dumplings together." There were many tables in the banquet hall for making dumplings. Xiao Kai's older sister was making dumplings with her colleagues from the business department and the cultural exchange department. However, there were not many people. The leaders were walking around to express their condolences to the people, so the staff members were not so busy. However, when Xiao Kai's older sister called out to them, The few diplomatic staff members smiled. "Little brother, let's go make dumplings, okay?" Shishi hesitated for a moment before she turned to ask her little brother. Little Fuchin was looking left and right. The noisy environment gave the little fellow an endless sense of novelty. When his elder sister asked him a second time, he turned his head back in confusion and looked at his elder sister in confusion. You won't listen to me. I won't ask you anymore." Shishi pouted. However, she quickly exhaled and said energetically, "Let's go make dumplings." Shishi held her little brother's hand and walked excitedly towards Xiaokai's older sister. She even held her little brother's hand and swung it vigorously. She looked like a military official who was doing a morning parade. Tong Tong liked this feeling very much. He giggled as he tried to keep up with his older sister's long legs. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.